to the Gainesville Regional Utility Authority Board meeting, a special meeting for June 10th. Ms. Clerk,
Thank you,
did you
Mr.
go by
Chair.
Ms. Clerk, or is that okay?
That's appropriate, if you would prefer that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item will be roll call. Director Lawson.
Here.
Director Carter.
Here.
Director Skinner.
Here.
Vice Chair Haslam.
Here.
Chair Bilarski.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the next item is the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, we adopt the agenda as stated.
I will second.
Second. Do we have some comment from the community about the adoption of the agenda?
Mr. Chair, Jim Conish, at your last meeting, you had said that at this meeting, we're going to look at capital expenditures. Now on the agenda, it says you just open up the whole budget. Are we going to be spoon-fed slides? Are we going to actually have a discussion on conforming the budget to the city charter's requirements?
Well, I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I would expect that there will be a discussion. That's what we're here for.
Not just like be fed slides with no discussion?
No, we'll be.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other comment? With that, will we have a vote for the adoption of the agenda? Everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The agenda passed unanimously. Mr. Chair, the next item is business discussion items. The first and only item is 2024-455 budget presentation, FY25 proposed budget, with the recommendation that the GRU authority receive the presentation and take any action deemed appropriate. And as you may recall, this is in addition to the presentation from the 529 meeting.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Cunningham.
yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. We'll get into the presentation in a second. The intent of tonight is to have a discussion and is to get into the details of the direction we want to go forward. And so what we have in the presentation continues to be a budget that is going to support the needs to continue our level of service and provide our services, to invest in the infrastructure so we can continue to do that in the future, and maintains the debt reduction plan. So we will get into the presentation right now. And again, the idea as we go through this is for the board to be having discussions and thoughts. And then as we get toward the end, it's really an attempt to try to drive toward a decision on the GFT and a few other items on the options that are provided. So with that, if we can bring up the presentation. All right, so I'm just going to try to kick this off and summarize what we heard in the last meeting from the board. We didn't get any board motion and final action, but what we try to do is take all the discussion that we heard. And what we heard was a desire to have scenarios and budget priorities that have no base rate increases in 2025, that has a zero or reduced GFT, possible austerity measures related to operating expenses and or capital expenses, and then a reduced buildup of reserves, because the option that we had some reserves built up on it as well. And then all those options look at it in terms of the long-term impact and what the future over the 10-year period looks like. So what we have in front of you and what we're going to walk through is the following options. Or following assumptions are in the options as well. One is every option that you'll see will be no base rate increases in any system in fiscal year 25. You'll see different options that have different potential reductions of GFT. So we presented the flat GFT in the 529 meeting. These will be reductions of that of 25, 50, 75, 100, as well as an option talking about the $68 million that we discussed and reducing the GFT annually by $6.8 million over the 10 years. And so we'll talk about what those look like. The budget also includes $15 million in reduction in capital expenses. And so, but to be, transparent, all of our items in our capital budget are things we require to continue to operate and maintain our facilities. And so when we say a reduction, it's a reduction in fiscal year 25, but those items will be, it's delayed. They'll be pushed out into future years down the road. It will not be in fiscal year 25. In terms of O&M expenses, I'll kind of give a high level. Over the last several years, essentially since the pandemic, we've had an extreme significant increase in inflationary costs that have impacted the utility industry and GRU. In the midst of that, we have worked to reduce expenses, but ultimately, the budget you have in front of you is the budget that our utility experts, many who are in the room here today, have built to maintain the level of service that we provide and the reliability we provide. And so the reductions in capital expenses are in there. We are continuing the reduced expenses that we proposed from an O&M perspective. And then the last piece is reserves. So we showed in our original proposal a buildup of reserves over time. That buildup was really there to accelerate debt reduction beyond the debt reduction plan. What we're showing tonight, we ran several scenarios. When we ran those scenarios of pulling reserves all the way down, what happened was we were no longer meeting our financial metric associated with days cash on hand. And as you all know, we've talked about several times, the days cash on hand really helps with our being highly leveraged. So we're highly leveraged, but we have that days cash on hand and some other financial metrics to balance that. And so when we noticed that it pulled that down below that target level, we reran the models to use that as a floor. So what you have in the main presentation is you're pulling down reserves, but the floor is to meet that 250 days cash on hand financial metric. In the appendix, there are slides where results that pull it down further, but again, those don't meet that financial metric that we have in our debt management policy. So we pulled it back up for those runs. Then what we did was these runs are kind of grouped into a couple different areas. One, it wasn't completely clear from the board the direction we were wanting to go in. So we did GFT reductions only in fiscal year 25. So we ran all of those. Again, no rate increases, but the reduction to GFT is only shown in fiscal year 25. Then we ran scenarios where those reductions were shown over the 10-year window. And then we have the last one is over the 10-year window regarding the $68 million GFT overpayments. And so those are like the three groups that we have. Mark is prepared to sort of walk through those. And again, this is for discussion, so interrupt, ask questions, or you all, obviously this is the first time you're going to be able to talk about this as a group, you all can have discussions or ideas with one another. So with that, Mark.
This first slide just demonstrates the dollar level associated with those percentage reductions we showed you. The 25% reduces the transfer about $3.8 million at 57.6 million, and then at 75%, 11.5. This table. This table represents management's proposal from May 29th. You saw this. It's got a $15.3 million transfer in 25. As a matter of fact, it was the proposal was $15.3 million in each year through the forecast period, and it generated $88.5 million in reserves over target. It supported a number of priorities in the budget. The infrastructure investment, affordable rates, providing for our future capacity needs, as well as the aggressive debt reduction that's associated with the $395 million in net debt reduction over the next decade in the debt reduction plan. The alternatives that we're about to show you tonight, they still support those basic priorities but based on board input from May 29th, we've pivoted somewhat, and as we bring that $88.5 million excess reserves over target down, that difference will be used to generate rate reduction rather than, as the CEO, general manager mentioned, a combination of potential incremental debt reduction or providing us a safety margin in the event that any of the assumptions that are in the net debt reduction plan don't get hit over the next decade. So like Tony mentioned, we broke these things into several sections. The first one we're going to go through is those various levels of GFT reductions in fiscal year 25 only. Oops. So this is the 25% reduction. I want to spend a minute on this one, just walking through the mechanics of how the model works and how it flows. And then as we move through the other models, I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm just going to hit whatever highlights we need to. But if there are any questions, please let me know. So there are two foundations that were built into each one of these models. The no rate increase in 25 and whatever the corresponding GFT reduction was. And so you can see highlighted in yellow, in 25, there is no base rate increase in any of the systems, and in the light blue is the GFT reduction. For this one, it's 25%. And so what we did in the modeling was we built those two pieces into the models, and then based on the structure that we had from May 29th, looked to see what the incremental reserves over target were. And then we walked the rates back to draw those reserves down to on or about the $50 million level, like Tony mentioned. At $50 million, what that provides for us is about 250 days of cash on hand. That meets the goal that had been approved as part of our debt management policy, and so that's how we built these and slid them back. And
Could I ask you a question in regard to that, Mark? The further we get into the debt defeasance, I would assume that days cash on hand could go down, depending. But right now, you're just using that kind of as the gold standard as you progress, right?
Yes, we're using that as the standard, and that is what is approved right now in the debt management policy.
Right. For folks that are listening, the rating agencies look at our debt management program, and because we have such high debt, they want to have a lot of reserves on hand. So the further you take debt down, maybe we wouldn't have to have so many days cash on hand. So it's a balancing act that the professionals at the utility have to undertake. And it's partly art, partly science, right?
Well, a lot of this is partly art and partly science, but yes, you're right. I mean, that's a good way to put it, is that all the rating agencies look at us and their first comment is that we're highly leveraged. We have pretty strong liquidity metrics, and those liquidity metrics have helped us in terms of, when we talk to the rating agencies, somewhat mitigate or offset that, their concerns about our leverage. And that is why when we were putting these models together, we wanted to make sure that we weren't pulling those excess reserves down further than we felt comfortable, or further or below what we've got in there as a goal in the debt management policy, because we didn't want to lose that balance with the rating agencies. One of the things I want to point out about this model is if you look at the gas system, there are no base rate increases in the gas system throughout the forecast period, and we're still generating excess reserves. So that's a piece of this. And the other thing is, we move through there, what you're going to see is that as we increase the level of GFT reduction, the projected base rates that are required to generate that $50 million in excess reserves are going to decline. Just math.
Well, I think some people would want to know why you can go from 25 to 34, 2025 to 2034, and in a system like gas not have any increases and still have reserves. Is there a reason that you could let the folks here, the board and the community
Well, for one
know?
thing, we've had past increases in the gas system, which have generated some of these. For another thing, a lot of the gas infrastructure is a little bit newer, and it's got a little bit less of a capital improvement requirement going forward. And as we talked about on May 29th, the increases that we had in there were to do two things. Number one was to allow us to accelerate the debt retirement in the gas system, but it was also to provide for any potential expansion in the system going forward.
Thank you.
That's 25%. This is 50. And this is 50%. Like I said, if you just look at look at the electric system, when we were at 25%, you had a 0.75% increase in '26. It drops down to 0.5% here, and that's what you're going to see as we move through all these.
Mark, next time, could you make it a little smaller? Yeah.
I figured that I'm the oldest person amongst everybody here. If I can see it, you should be able to see it.
Touche, touche.
Now you see why we have our computers here.
Yeah.
And I have mine blocked.
So there's 75%, and this is 100%. This is the pause, I think, that, or the way you put it, Mr. Chair, last time. And there are a few things about this that are a little bit different. Obviously, there are, this would be no transfer at all in fiscal '25. And this is a good time to remind the board that, because we do long-term modeling, because we need to understand what the long-term implications of what we propose is. But the decisions that y'all are making are really, they're one-year decisions. Because you're going to be back here, and I know you're looking forward to it, you're going to be back here next year doing the same thing, hearing some of the same information. And you're going to be able to make changes or course corrections at that point in time. But, we've got 10 years up there. I just wanted to reinforce that this is essentially a one-year decision. So those are the models for the GFT reductions at various levels for 1 year only. The other years, by the way, I should have mentioned this up front, the other years past FY '25 and those reductions are the $15.3 million that you saw in the May 29th proposal. So now we're moving on to the set where we are going to make these 25, 50, 75, 100% reductions in each of the years of the forecast period, 25 through 34. And there's 25% in the electric side. You can see, looking at that system, no increase in '25, but also no increase in '26.
So just to be clear on that, you're saying that this would be the 25% reduction each year for the next 10 years.
Yeah, if you look in the light blue, which is easy to see from here, the light blue, the $11.5 million transfer would be what you transfer each year, 25 through 34. Here's 50%, and you can see what that generates is there's no, in the electric system, there's no rate increase proposed until 2028. This would result in a $7.6 million transfer each of those 10 years. 75% electric system, you don't have an increase until 2031, and it's 0.25%. This is a $3.8 million transfer for every year through the next decade. And then finally, here's 100% reduction. This is no transfer for the next 10 years. It's at zero. You can see there are no rate increases in the electric system through the forecast period. And you'll also notice that even with no rate increases, we've only drawn the reserves down to $60 million over target, because it would actually require rate reductions to bring it down to the $50 million level altogether. This is stripping $153.2 million out of GRU's expenses over the next decade, and also $153 million out of general government's revenues over the next decade.
Did you mention about the 93? I don't know if I zoned out for a second there about the buildup of 93 million.
Yeah, it's the fact that in the electric system, even with no rate increases over the next decade, we can only draw that reserve excess down to $60 million. You would have to actually cut rates to pull the whole thing down to $50 million.
I would like to make the emphasis to the board that this very slide kind of goes contrary to the narrative that's out there that, the general fund transfer doesn't do a lot. The reduction of it doesn't do a lot for rates and rate reductions. I mean, this elimination of the general fund transfer over that next decade would ostensibly hold no increases for 10 years to the electric system. That's a consequential number. So it's very, what was the word, correlative to rate increases and rate reductions, the reduction of the GFT.
Yeah, and the reason you see that impact is that under the scenario, under the, what we, at least partly what we thought we heard on the 29th was you wanted to use that GFT reduction as rate relief rather than splitting it between rate relief and net debt reduction or putting it all towards incremental net debt reduction. This is taking $153 million and applying it to reducing rates over the next decade.
Mr. Chair, just a quick
Yes, sir.
thought here. And yes, obviously, if we eliminate 150 million over the next 10 years, there will be some sort of rate relief. That's obvious, and people who say that there wouldn't be, obviously don't own a calculator. My concern would be, as it's been all along, if the city's entitled to or allowed to have a transfer GFT or something, at what point do we pay the piper? I'm in agreement with trying to recoup the $68 million. I'm not in favor of going, 10 years, 100% reduction, 150 million, because quite frankly, then you're just putting the shoe on the other foot. And I got one email, someone says, you don't have to worry about if they raise the taxes, that's not your fault. In business, whether any business we run, we look at consequences of our actions, okay? If I'm selling golf cars or real estate, and I have the ability to do something, but the consequences are that my clients or my ratepayers are going to suffer, I need to look at that. So if the city raises the taxes yet again, like they did recently to recoup a lot of the money, then they get the transfer. Do you really think, anybody on this board think they're going to go, hey, wait, let's give back the tax money? They're going to get the transfer plus keep the tax money. They're going to be in a better position than they were before. So as business people, as we are up here, I just want to look at all the possibilities, Mr. Chair.
Well,
So
I
I definitely
appreciate
want to recoup the 68 million. You can look at all my previous statements. I said that when I was chair.
I remember that.
How we get there, we might differ on.
I would just add before you continue, just in response to Director Carter, Section 7.12 of the House Bill 1645 says the limitation on the utility directives are that, let's see where we can pick it up. We shall consider only pecuniary factors and utility industry best practices standards, which do not include consideration of the furtherance of social, political, or ideological interests. Appropriate pecuniary factors and utility industry best practices are those which solely further the fiscal and financial benefit of the utility system and customers. So while I understand from kind of a personal level, we have been appointed to carry out House Bill 1645. And frankly, I think any other consideration is a violation of what we've been instructed to do and why we were appointed.
So, this is a good time for us to talk. Under that, you're saying there shouldn't be a transfer at all, so why are we having this conversation? Let's
Well,
take the vote.
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's about balancing the
That's what I'm
fiscal-
trying to do, sir.
No, within the utility system and its customers.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Well, see, I go back to, they've been addicted to this money. What do you do with an addict? You don't cut them off. That has detrimental impacts. So we need to be reasonable, and I understand where you're coming from, Chair, but I concur with Director Carter in, trying to recoup, even though it was in the past, that $60+ million, but then also providing something. Now, what that is to the other side, I don't know. That's why I'm looking forward to this discussion that we're having today.
So why don't we go through and see what else they can tighten the budget up? See if we can pull any more money out. Maybe we can talk about the general transfer fund coming back up a little bit.
Yeah,
'Cause
there's-
I feel like in this budget, they're gonna hand us some stuff that we can still peel off of. We can peel that back, and then maybe the general transfer fund, instead of being zero, we can talk about being a little higher than zero. Because I have a feeling, from what I've seen, and I'm not a forensic accountant, that there's other stuff we can pull back.
I don't disagree with you.
So I figure,
But-
let's let them
but-
peel it back, and
Right,
then,
but we're at the point where we're talking transfer, and that's why I wanted to have that
Sure,
discussion. And, yeah, you can read that all day long, but as a business person, business people, you know, there's consequences to your action that can have an adverse effect to this utility. So I am looking long range. So I know you don't think that at this time, but I am, and I will go with the board. I can tell you that because you got the vote, so I'll go with you.
No.
Whatever it's gonna be.
Look, I appreciate a full-throated discussion.
But I'm well aware of what that bill says, sir. I keep it in my briefcase also.
Well, and again, I'll say that I was the guy that said that having a general fund transfer for municipal utility is ordinary, reasonable, and necessary. So I've never been for taking it to zero, but what I have been for is the recoupment, of the $68 million that we paid. It's a matter of.
100%.
Right, so we have a distinction without a difference in a lot of ways here. So let's let Mr. Benton, we don't want to get him into overtime because he's paid a lot.
We've only got 2.5 more hours.
Other duties as required.
Yeah. I don't even know what game it is, but
I
me
have it
too.
live. No.
Well, you gentlemen teed it up for me. So, this next section of this was, there's been a lot of discussion about whatever definition you use for, as a proxy for profit, recouping a certain dollar amount that was considered overpaid over a period of time. And so what we've got here are two scenarios. One is taking, $6.8 million a year for the next 10 years over the forecast period off of the model that we showed you on May 29th, which was a flat $15.3 million transfer, taking $6.8 million off of that a year, which would leave you with a transfer of about $8.5 million. The other is implementing the formula that was agreed upon back last spring, between, federal government and the utility. The formula that was submitted to JLAC and the Auditor General, which is built upon, 70% of the total insured value of the utility and a percentage of the electric system revenues. Obviously, that formula had projected growth through that over the forecast period.
Mr. Brenton, I'm sorry. So the insured value, that would be replacement value, not net value, correct?
Actually, I would defer to Mr. Varvel about what total insured value means, but
Yeah, because typically you would insure for replacement costs. So that would let me believe that it's a future number, not a present number. So I'm just,
yeah, it's going to, what I can tell you without talking to Mr. Varvel about it is it's projected to grow. It's going to take that transfer.
yeah, because I know in my house, I insure, if they want to give me what I insured for, I'll take it tonight. So that's,
That number generates
No problem.
that $15.3 million number in 2025, and over the forecast period, it grows to a number of a little over $21 million. So what you'll see on the next two slides is taking off that formula period, $6.8 million off that number as we go through.
I think Mr. Varvel wants to make his inaugural appearance as a speaker at the GRU Authority. So go ahead, Mr. Varvel.
Hi, Steve Arvell, shared service provider to the Gainesville Regional Utilities Authority. To Director Carter's question, the answer is yes. We try as best as we can to put our total insured values, just like your homeowners,
Right.
is at a replacement cost, correct? And that is modified annually based on input from utility staff. Like this year, we're going to take a deep dive into the wastewater values on the sheet to make sure that we have adequately increased those over time to reflect replacement costs. But it's no different than what individuals see on their homeowners insurance, okay?
thank you, sir. That's about what I anticipated.
Yeah,
Okay.
Answer the question.
So this is the first one. This is the first model. This is based off that flat 15.3 that you saw at the May 29th meeting. So it results in about $8.5 million transfer each year over the next 10 years. This one is, if you look at the top, this is based off the formula, and you can see that taking $6.8 million a year off of the formula growth results in a transfer of about just under $9.5 million in 2025, and it grows to a little over $15.1 million by the time you get to 2034. But it takes the $68 million in equal, both of them, takes the $68 million in equal increments over the next decade. Just depends on what your starting point is. This is just a summary. What we heard, what staff heard from the 29th as compared to what we're presenting tonight versus what was presented on the 29th, we heard a couple things. You're interested in rate reduction, no rate increases, no base rate increases in 25. You can see there's no base rate increases in 25 in any of these models compared to the 1% electric, 2% water, wastewater, and gas. You asked for GFT reduction. We've beat it to death tonight. We've got 25, 50, 75, 160, $6.8 million. And you wanted us to reduce the buildup of the reserves over target. And these proposals, all except the one, the 100, the 100%, through the forecast period, all of these models provide for a reduced, reserve buildup over target from $88 million to, somewhere around $50 million. Couple of notes. I just want to point out there's no potential IRP impacts in this analysis. Reducing the reserves obviously can, potentially have an impact on financial flexibility as we move forward. It removes the margin for error in the debt reduction plan. There are a lot of moving parts in that net debt reduction plan. So if we don't, if some of those assumptions don't pan out, that extra, reserve margin was in there to create a buffer. And it limits our ability to, if we did hit all of those points, it limits our ability to accelerate debt reduction past the $395 million in net debt reduction that we've got in the plan. But as you can see the last bullet up there, I want to point out that everything we showed you, that we have shown you tonight, still preserves the $395 million in net debt reduction that you see in this plan. And I'm not going to go over this slide again. You saw it in your last meeting. I'm sure you're as tired of looking at it as I am. So I'm going to move on to.
So Mark, thanks. So I think the challenge for the board is, how do we move toward a kind of a path forward as a group? So a couple of assumptions that we made here and that I'm recommending for the board is that we maintain that 250 days cash on hand, and that's all the examples we have that has that floor of around 50 million. That we are reducing the reserve buildups to increase the rate relief as opposed to accelerating debt reduction. So that's what all of these have. So those are assumptions in there. Fundamentally, I think what, as a board, we have to move toward, you all have to move toward, is confirmation that we do want to have no base rate increases in fiscal year 25. So all of these options have that. Then the level of reduction. We had the different levels. We talked about the $68 million options. And then finally, the frequency of those reductions. So in the $68 million options, it's over the 10-year period, reducing 6.8 a year. In the other options, it's whether you want to maintain that just next year, and then we can come back and develop something for the future, or whether we want to address that fully, fully over the 10-year period. So this is really where the discussion in the board, I think, is really critically important. The other thing I did want to take a few minutes to address is I heard a couple comments just about further reductions. I think a director or the chair had talked about that. So we have provided additional supplemental information. Let me step back for a second. Unfortunately, the timing of how this board is, we didn't have a chance to walk through the building of this budget. We didn't have a chance to kind of go through all the details with the board. We kind of started at the finish line with the board. And so that it does a disservice for you that this timing is difficult to try to get this approved budget by July 1st. But I do think it might be worthwhile to go through some of the discussion just from the comments that I heard, some of the discussion around reducing O&M expenses, for instance, or the capital expenses. So if you can humor me for a few minutes, I'd like to kind of get into some of that supplemental information that I've provided.
Well, this is the supplemental that talked about the change from the budget to the budget.
This is a supplemental information that it addresses several things. So it addresses our capital improvement plan, it addresses our O&M expenses, it addresses the economy, the impacts of the economy, the utility industry over the last several years and how we've responded to that.
Is it gonna address why things can't go down?
Yeah.
No, well, before we move to that point, I'd like to address this slide.
Okay.
Because I worked all week on the budgets that you gave me, and I applied my standards as a former GM to that.
Okay.
Along with my 46 years in budget-making decisions. So if we could bring this up, for me.
Mr. Chair, the one that you have, sir,
Right.
or the one that you provided, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think it's really important here. We've seen, let's bring it up, and I'll talk some more to that subject. Because I looked at your supplemental information, and you can talk about it after this. And I hope I have the clicker.
And Mr. Chair, point,
What is
is that in backup, sir?
No,
Okay, because we're gonna get some feedback from public at some point that we're
Right.
bringing stuff to meeting after meeting without backup.
that's right.
Okay. Printed.
So, I heard in discussions, each one of the board members came in and talked to you and your team about the fact that we can't reduce O&M. We can't reduce O&M.
Can I address that?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we have been reducing O&M the last several years. And so the request was, since the last meeting, are there additional reductions? And the conclusion, working with our team, is without reducing level of service or reliability of the services we provide, we can't do it further than we have. So what we've provided is a budget that's about $2 million less than last year's or this current year's budget, reduced expenses from fiscal year '23 about $4 million less than actual expenses in fiscal year '23. That's the budget we vetted down to and what we're presenting. So I just want to make sure it's clear that we have reduced the budget. We just didn't reduce it any further since May 29th.
In the world I live in and have lived in for 46 years, you look at cash expenditures, you look at accrual method in the previous year, and you compare it to that.
Right.
You always go out to folks and say, what resources do you need? And they come back and give you the stars, the moon, and everything else. And when you come back, I saw some of the numbers. You were at 165 million and you got it down to 156. Some number like that.
Yeah.
Well, there's no way the board's going to be approving $165 million. I mean, that's everything that if you ever wanted would be $165 million. That's not a cut. So if you bear with me, I'll go through the cuts that a former general manager would come up with. Is this the, there we go.
Did you get it? Okay, I was saying, Mark was shooting it over with that one.
So I started with a deliverable scorecard, just like you did. I had 5 things, and I broke apart the CapEx that we wanted reduced by a minimum of $20 million, and then O&M expenses by $5 million. And on each one of those issues, you didn't make the mark on that. You deferred $15 million, and there was 0 reduced from the budget you gave us. I'm not talking about the budget that you all had worked on, but the budget that was presented to us. You said, we can't reduce that any further. And to me, they're the 2 most important parts, because I think we have agreement on the board in terms of the GFT and the $68 million. I could be reading the tea leaves wrong, but I think there's this idea that we've prepaid $68 million and we ought to be able to recoup it somehow. So that's the scorecard. So like I said, I have 46 years of budget-making experience. When I looked at your budget, there were 5 things general categories that came out to me. GRU appears to have over-budgeted for its own electric services. GRU's biggest customer is themselves. but the number you have in there is way too high. GRU is funding vacant positions ahead of filling them. In other words, to the general public, they're funding positions for which no one's employed. So rather than wait to, and we'll get into that. There's multiple expenditures on initiatives for which the board has yet to be informed or approved. And one of those is the engineering services for the natural gas plant. They're retaining programs beyond their usefulness and not in accordance with House Bill 1645. Example of that is natural gas rebates, the IT SLA, and finally, a failure to employ zero-based budgeting using budget-to-budget increases instead.
Mr. Chair, can we discuss these, or do you want to go through?
I'm going to go through them. You can tell us what you think.
You're gonna let him respond though, right?
Sure.
All right.
Oh, absolutely. I haven't gotten to my points yet, so that's why I'm there. So the whole question about has GRU over budgeted its own electric services? It's interesting because I didn't have access to all the information. So I looked at the residential KWH price as a proxy for year over year as to how much the price has increased. And assuming that GRU's usage stays relatively the same, you could look to see, using the price increases or the bill increases for the utility would be the proxy for what your electric rates or your electric service should be. So, actual numbers in 2022, your KW price on total bills, including the fuel adjustment, went up 30%, and your bills went up 32%. Next year in 23, again, actuals, the rates went up 8%, you went up 7%. Then it got funky in 2024 and 2025. The rates went down 16% in 2024 in the budget and 18%, but your costs went up 1% each year. So being that, as you were suggesting, forensic accountant, CPA, wonky guy, likes numbers, I said, I got to look at this. So I put my Excel spreadsheet up there. And what I saw was, if you look at the column that says actual fiscal year 2023, that was the height of the fuel adjustment. So you had $10,600,000 in there, right? Well, I'm sure at that point, that was used to budget in fiscal year 2024, which came in at $10,700,000. And that became the reason you budgeted $10,700,000 in fiscal year 25. But if you looked at the rates in each one of those, they went from 17 cents a KW in 23 to 14 cents and 14.5 cents down to 14 cents. You would have had to increase your consumption by more than 20% during that period of time. So I double-checked it against the numbers that you had for the actuals through May or April of this year. And this, I'm sorry if this gets really wonky. The bottom line is you've over budgeted $1.5 million in fiscal year 24 and $2 million in fiscal year 25. No ifs, ands, buts. So when you say you can't find anything, I think you ought to go back and look at your expenses and do recalculations on what you've done. Actually have your accountants look at that. The next item is this practice of funding vacant positions. For those that aren't aware, everyone within the municipal sector, the city, talk about authorized FTEs. You have 903 FTEs authorized. You have filled through May from your workday printouts, you have 821. That means you have 82 vacancies. You utilize a 6% vacancy rate. That means that out of the 903, 849 positions are funded. It's 21 positions more than what you have filled. So it's outside the 6% vacancy rate. If you just unfund those positions, the 27, you save $3.5 million. Between the two of those, we're at the $5 million I asked for. We're there. The next thing, as I started to investigate and look at some of these numbers, is you stated to the board at the last meeting that the IRP is still under review. Options were going to come to the board. You said GRU is not committed to anything regarding the IRP. However, I did a search of opengov.com, and I found something that was disturbing to me. On May 15, 2024, 8 days before that meeting, or no, 8 days, so it's like 14 days, 2 weeks. GRU formally started the process of its capacity expansion plans. It released a solicitation for professional engineering services that would, guess what? It would select a firm that would assist GRU with natural gas powered generation, battery storage capacity, among other things. Is this the $500,000 in the Sustainability Department's budget for contract services? Have we approved that? Are you planning an unbudgeted expense? I mean, did I miss something here? The solicitation states that GRU is finalizing the IRP recommendation to install 30 to 50 megawatts of fast start natural gas-fired capacity in 2028. Approximately 50 megawatts of battery storage capacity in 2029. To reiterate, on May 29th, 2 weeks after issuing the solicitation, the GM told the board that GRU hasn't landed on anything yet. When was the board to be made aware of this? I mean, I actually asked at one of the meetings if you would give me the types of costs that have been spent and are projected to be spent on the IRP. I didn't get anything, but there's more. On May 9th, 2024, the United States Environmental Protection Agency finalized its standards for fossil fuel power plants in which they intend to ensure new combustion turbines are constructed to minimize greenhouse gas emissions, equivalent to that made possible through CCS, which is carbon capture and sequestration. It means any CO2 that comes out has to be sequestered and it has to be captured. That makes the construction of a new 30 to 50 megawatt natural gas plant highly unlikely and uneconomical to construct. Is this new EPA greenhouse gas rule part of the current IRP? I want you all to remember when I started this off with a presentation of what happened in the past. Remember how cutting edge became bleeding edge? To me, this is an example of that. And by the way, the newsletter there, that's by Holland and Knight. They're our city bond counsel. We do work with Holland and Knight. We should certainly be well aware of their ideas. And by the way, the executive director of the Florida Municipal Power Association is in the top 50 energy, influential energy folks within Florida. I set him up with a meeting for you to talk about his work on greenhouse gas emissions. So, a lot of questions there. Beyond that, you've stated, in regard to the SLAs and the MOUs, you've stated to the board that the SLAs, which are service level agreements, MOUs are memorandums of understanding, were being worked on and will be brought before the board. To date, we haven't had a single properly executed SLA or MOU brought before us, or any modification thereof, and even when the former board was brought in there. And the problem is, that's impacting fiscal year 2024 and 25 budgets. You know, if the SLA is losing $3 million, it's in violation of the House Bill 1645, and that needs to be recovered in fiscal year 2024. They must be executed given the large budget impacts to GRU. So When you said that you can't make $5 million of reductions in the O&M, I put together a dollar amount associated with all the things I've talked about. You unfund the 27 position vacancies, $3.5 million. You correct over budgeting of electric services, $3.4 million. You increase the recovery in fiscal year '24 of the IT SLA, that's $3 million. I think you have a lot of zero-based budgeting impacts. I'm just saying 1/2 of 1% of your budget is $1 million. Eliminate that IRP contract services, $500,000. Reduce the overall professional services, which would be 20% of the professional services budget, is $500,000. And eliminate natural gas rebates. We determined, back when I was the general manager, these developers are going to put natural gas in anyway. You don't have to pay them $250,000 to do it. So you get a total of $12.15 million, yet you can't come up with $5 million. So it leads me to make the recommendation that regarding the budget, that we reduce CapEx by $20 million, starting with $15 million of reduction, as you've suggested, followed with the remaining $5 million allocated on a pro rata basis among all the departments, $20 million. Number two, you reduce budgeted O&M expenses by $12 million, apportioned between fiscal year 2024 and 2025, as it shows there, as my analysis shows. You reduce the utility base rates to 0 for fiscal year 2025. And as we've all been talking here, keep the general fund formula intact, but recover the $68 million against the annual $15 million until it's paid back, until it's depleted. And finally, reduce the projected reserves from the $88 million overage to no more than $50 million by the end of the period. Now, before I come back to that, I'd also like to move to the next one, and that is recognition that this would save $100 and $125 million of expenditure reductions for rate relief and debt reduction over the next decade. We're looking at $300 million of debt defeasance. Just like that, we can come up with another $100 to $125 million, whereas you said there was no there there. And I go back to the section 12 of the House Bill 1645. We shall consider only pecuniary factors and industry best practices standards and should solely focus on the fiscal financial benefit of the utility system and its customers. So, as a follow-up to this, I have another 4 recommendations. BFA, which is an acronym for Budget, Finance, and Accounting, shall undertake an analysis of the appropriate percentage of GRU's net earnings before capital contributions and GFT to be transferred to the city with an emphasis on sustaining debt reduction, capital investment, and affordable utility rates. When complete, present that analysis to the board for consideration as part of the GFT GSC formula as a limitation on the transfer. GM should provide immediate communication to the board on IRP plans, decisions, incurred costs, and projected planning costs, given the recent solicitation with which the board was wholly unaware. The cost should be reviewed by BFA prior to board submission. The IRP may be paused because we're looking at a $3 billion expenditure, folks. GM shall provide immediate communication to the board on Main Street water recovery facility capacity renewal and upgrade project plans, decisions, incurred costs, and projected planning, given the magnitude and scope of that project. Those costs should be reviewed by BFA prior to the board submission. Phase 2 may be paused. That's $110 million. That's a generational cost for this utility. And the GM shall provide immediate communication to the board on SLA, MOU status, and expected costs for fiscal year 2025 budget process. Those costs shall be reviewed by the BFA prior to board submission. I'm extremely disappointed that I have to make these recommendations, but that's how we should operate. So I would open up those recommendations to the board to see if they, I mean, I would entertain a motion on the recommendation for the budget and the recommendation for the follow-up, or some points in between. No, go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
One thing you said that concerned me, and please, you're saying you didn't have access to numbers you needed?
That's correct.
That's not acceptable. Because any board member, through the CEO, should be able to get any number. I mean, I've been provided numbers that I've asked for. I'm trying to get deep in the weeds, and that's not a good place for me to be, but that bothers me. And then just to follow up, and I said this a few times privately, and I've said it at the board at least once, you're in a very unique position, because most of us up here don't know what we don't know. And so I take that very serious, what you said. I like what you said. If there's money to be saved across the board, I'm happy with it. I don't think that's a detriment to the, as long as it's not a detriment to the utility, I'm happy with it. And I think you're the most qualified person to call that out. So I am, once again, I'm going to sort of look at you for this. I would like the other board members to speak before a motion's made, and I'll be happy to try to capture some of that, because it is a few-parter.
Yeah, it is a few-parter. There's no doubt about it.
And I've had some discussions across the street, and I believe, Tony, you can address this. I believe the city has in their budget the 5.3 million in the IT SLA, correct?
I believe it's 5.89, that is correct.
For next year.
For next year, not for fiscal year '24.
Correct.
So taking a loss of $3 million in fiscal year '24.
So, Mr. Chair, can I have an opportunity to?
Absolutely.
So I've not seen any of this till tonight. I was trying to take some notes. I don't have a copy of what you provided. So I'm going to try to do my best to walk through, oh, that'd be great, to walk through and address these items. First, let me just kind of, okay, so first is, back, I shared a little earlier, because of timing, we weren't able to sort of start from the beginning and walk through our budget with the board. And that is by far the preferred method to lead up to what.
May I suggest to you that that's obfuscation? We're not talking about leading up to the board. You gave us numbers and said you couldn't change those numbers. Don't change the point and say I didn't have the ability to explain this to you. You said you couldn't change the numbers. I'm showing you you can.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I'm not trying to make an excuse. I was just trying to provide the context of what we've done as a board and the process that we sort of moved forward through with the time scale we had. So with that being said, we went through a process starting back in November. As you stated earlier, utility experts build a budget. They build what they need to provide the utility services that we have. We take that budget and we reduced that budget. We went out and, well, if I go back 2 years ago, we took that budget and reduced it by about $3.4 million. Then, when we came into this fiscal
For
year.
clarity, you didn't reduce a budget. You reduced the requests that came in from the staff, the professionals that you have, and you didn't reduce it compared to other costs that you incurred.
Yeah,
So you have to be careful in the words that you use, because words have meaning. So you didn't reduce anything.
we reduced expenses of the utility by eliminating positions, by reducing actual expenses that we had spent before. We reduced those expenses from the fiscal year '24 budget. And then in the fiscal year '25 budget, we do a 2-year budget. So we had a budget, we took, and to your point, we took that '25 budget and we reduced that budget that we had projected from fiscal year '25, we reduced that. Those budgets are about, fiscal year '25 is about $4 million less than what our actual costs were in fiscal year '23. So there is a real reduction in those dollars from fiscal year '23, not from the budget, from the actuals. So that's the budget we brought forth. May 29th, we heard from the board the different things we were trying to achieve. We went back out and we looked at, okay, let's look at our budgets. Do we have that? Do we have any additional cuts? So at that point, we did not, with the time period we had as well, we did not go back and do any additional cuts in O&M, essentially because where we were butting up against a lot is where our staffing levels are and reducing actual staffing. And let me just touch on,
Well, I'd interject before you touch on that. What I'm suggesting is no reduction in any employees that have seats in the organization. This is reducing vacancies that you have yet to be filled, but you're asking us to fund. And do you understand when you're asking them, you're asking the customer to prepay for people that you have yet to hire, and it's in their rates. Now, what would you say to somebody that can't afford their bills, that they're prepaying for increases for GRU ahead of time? When you have access to us, and you can come back to us and say, I want to modify the budget because we have, we have this next expansion, or we have this next group of employees that we have to hire. There's no need for that, Mr. Cunningham.
yeah, so let me let's talk that through a little bit. So, as you know, we have a vacancy rate. So we have the 903 FTEs. We reduced that by 6%, and that leaves, I'll trust your numbers. It's the first time I saw them. So that leaves 27 unfunded positions, essentially. What happens in our business is we're hiring, people are leaving, people are coming. You're hiring and they're leaving. So let's say it's an accountant. You have an accountant that you need to have in your utility. So typically those 27 positions are out on the street. We're actively hiring those individuals, and we're filling those positions. So that I want to be clear, those aren't positions that we got on a shelf and we're collecting revenue for. Those are positions we're actively hiring and filling because we need them. It could be an operator at a plant that's filling a shift. And so if we don't have that operator, we're paying overtime to other employees to fill those shifts until we get that person in place. So it also doesn't always mean if you don't hire that person, you're going to save those dollars, because you got to pay somebody to cover a shift. And
But you didn't even make that attempt. You remember when you reported to me, and we talked about vacancies that way, and we said, listen, you have to look at how long that vacancy has existed.
Absolutely.
And we looked at things that were out there 6 months, a year. We had some that were 5 years.
Yep.
Has that been looked at?
Yes. So that was part of the reduction of the 25 FTEs that we've reduced.
And at what point?
So at this, we're not doing, I just want to be really clear, we're not doing anything different than we have historically. These are active positions that we are trying to fill that are needed to provide the utility services we have. And so, so that's what they are. I can go back and do an analysis of a snapshot of where we are now and provide that to the board. I'm going off the top of my head, like I said, of what all 27 of those are and where they are and what's being held. But those are positions we're actively filling. We're not holding those for any reason. They could be a position that left today, and we need to fill that position.
I've been in a position, I understand it, but there are things called freezes, and that's essentially what you're talking about here. Freezing the positions that you now have and making do with that, because you'd rather the organization make do than the customers make do.
So I will say, Mr. Chair, the challenge with that, I hear what you're saying. We have done hiring freezes at times. The challenge is that it really depends on the position. So let me take the shift worker. If it's a shift working position, we're paying that cost now with overtime and other people covering it. So it doesn't, just freezing that position doesn't mean you reduce that cost. So it really depends on what positions. What we've identified right now is these are positions we need to fill to continue to provide the level of service that we're providing. And so that's what we have. But I don't have those details today of what all those are, but I can bring that back to the board if that is the desire of the board. So I wanted to hit on, again, trying to go through the different ones. So the over budgeting on electric. So yeah, there is a very distinct challenge you have in billing for electric, and that challenge, as you pointed out, Mr. Chair, is the fuel adjustment. So if you look at the last several years, the fuel adjustment went up pretty drastically. And typically when we're budgeting, we could be budgeting 18 to 20 months in advance. And so there are predictions and there are indices that we follow to try to predict what that fuel adjustment's going to be, which will ultimately set the cost of that electric service, but it is out in the future, and typically it never hits it exactly. So what we attempt to do is budget for what that electric service will be. So what we're coming out of now is elevated electric prices because of the fuel adjustment, and now we're coming back out of that. And so we're ratcheting down our budget relative to that. And as you stated, at the same time, you're looking at what growth is. And so to your point of, is that over budgeted right in that area? There's a,
Well, Mr. Cunningham, you remind me of President Clinton, who said it depends on what your definition of is at this point. No, okay, stop with the rationalization, stop with the, oh, we do this 18 months in advance. You have an obligation at a point when you're at $1.4 million over in a particular item to change that or to make the board aware of that. And you then don't parlay that with over budgeting the next year with $2 million.
yeah,
Can I
so-
jump in
yeah, go
real
ahead.
quick? So one of the things, I think it's important to recognize that you can make the budget whatever you want. It's just your operational risk.
I beg to
Right.
disagree. No, you
So
don't.
There's an operational risk component of this.
That may be a management
So-
philosophy you have.
so we can-
Excuse
we can
me, I
take-
have the floor.
Pardon me.
That may be a management philosophy that you have, but it's not one that I agree with. It's totally inappropriate. It's not something that we should be doing as a utility. We should be having conservative principles, and we should adhere to actual costs. You're rationalizing over budgeting. You can shake your head no all you want, but it's just displaying your arrogance. Stop with the over rationalization of budgeting $3.4 million more in electric costs because you don't look at actual to budget. You've shown it in everything that I've gotten, everything the previous board has gotten. It disturbs me that you're continuing to rationalize and make excuses. You're doubling down.
So, Mr. Chair, I would say what we're attempting to do is provide an explanation. If we can kind of work, if we can move forward on
I haven't
that.
heard anything say that you made a mistake.
Oh, well, I will admit, yeah, absolutely. The budget, anything that we're doing is not perfect, right? And we're trying to predict what's occurring in the future.
You're
as best
minimizing,
we
you
can.
know that. Nothing's perfect, therefore I can make mistakes and everything's fine.
Do you want to go further on the
Yeah,
electric
so let
and
me
how we
offer
can
this.
arrive
I
at
think
it?
we could take tree trimming to zero.
Okay, that's just absurdity.
Well,
No, so, okay,
Well,
listen, okay, I'm taking it
Let me-
back.
let me-
Okay,
yeah, I'll go to electric.
No, no,
Brett,
no, no,
what-
no,
I
we're
didn't
done.
hear you, Brett. Can you say that again?
Yeah, so, based on our operational expertise, right?
Yeah.
The folks in this audience, many of them, they're dedicated to provide reliable, efficient services. So these budgets are predicated on what it takes to deliver that level of service. All right? So you can make the budget whatever you want, but it doesn't guarantee the actuals are going to hit the mark. And what I mean by that, and the chair is right, I used an absurd example, is you can do things like stop tree trimming. That's a $4 million part of the budget. When storm season comes, you're going to pay more than $4 million cleaning up the mess. All right, so that's the point of the operational risk. You can take $4 million of operational risk. You're putting it on the table. But we know based on our experience that we need a 3 to 4 year tree trimming program to make sure we minimize that risk. That is what is embedded in these numbers from an electrical perspective. So the general manager talked about it. In 2020, we budget, or 2022, excuse me, we budgeted $7.6 million. The actual that year was 8.6. It all depends on what the rate is on the fuel adjustment, but also the weather. If it's dry in May, like it's been, you're going to spend more electricity. So we can ramp this up and ramp this down to make the number. But you're taking an operational risk. I just
None of this is applicable to the electric services that you're talking about. It's an out-and-out mistake that you're trying to justify. Listen, we're stopping discussion at this point. I will entertain a motion at this point for the termination of the general manager and removal from his position.
I was off by 2 weeks. I guess the first week. Okay, pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd make that motion.
Do we have a second? I'm passing it. I second the motion. Any comments from the community?
Mr. Chair, I've personally brought $1 million to that drive-through window, and I jammed that down my tenants' throats as additional rent. As a percentage of their total expenses, the GRU bill has climbed to 25, 30% of the rent when it used to be 10 or 15%. I'm in the duck pond. My rents are up dramatically,
Are you going to reach a conclusion here, Mr. Connor?
and the GRU bills have outstripped it by about 2. This is very sad, but Mr. Coates showed that Mr. Cunningham falsified the cost allocation reports to hide the fact that he wasn't paying, that the city wasn't paying for the IT services they were receiving. There was a trial, so to speak. Do you think that's the only place where we have out-and-out fraud? It's not. There's dozens of financial associations with no SLA, no MOU. There's outright breaches of MOUs. We're funding the city attorney who's trying to eliminate the authority. I mean, people are watching. You know, we deserve better. The board voted twice to look for a new GM. I've heard that Lawson pulled the plug on the search. How? First it was going to be 50, then it was going to be 90. So, and this is the last thing. You are to appoint a CEO GM, and you have not done so. 11 months in, this gentleman is grandfathered, stripped of all powers that you welded under 3.06. Just ultra-virus acts are a way of life. Not his fault. It's the dysfunction caused by the agitators suing for any reason. They'll sue you if the meeting goes too long.
Yeah. Let's stick to the point here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to clear up that point?
Oh,
Yeah, point of clarification, I'm the one that stopped the CEO search. I talked to Scott Fry first, and I said, under the current circumstances, I don't believe it's wise to move forward. And I said, but Mr. Lawson was in charge of it, so by all means, talk to him. And I think we also consulted with the attorney, perhaps. But it wasn't Mr. Lawson I initially started it. Point of clarification.
thank you.
Debbie Martinez, through the chair. As a retired registered nurse, addicts have to work their own recovery. Otherwise, you become enablers. It's not about not caring for the addict. It's allowing them to work their own recovery. We spent over, it seems at least 4 months. Mr. Cunningham is a nice guy. But I've worked with a lot of surgeons that were nice guys, but doesn't mean that they were doing a good job. We've been watching the financial bleeding for 4 months while we've been giving proclamations to GRU employees. So yes, I support this motion, and it's not personal. As I talk to the CEO of HCA North Florida Regional all the time. It's about looking out for that patient, which is a GRU customer, and thank you for the motion, and I support it.
Chuck Ross, I'm a GRU ratepayer and a resident of Gainesville, and I think your bullying behavior of the manager today is appalling. I think that you didn't give him an opportunity to respond to the questions, and I think this gotcha grandstanding is I should say, the rest of the board, I don't know if you agree with the way the chair was handling the meeting, but you can overrule him at any time by a majority vote, because I don't think this is this is not an appropriate way to conduct business. And no, I do not think you should terminate the manager now, but I think the damage is done already. This was just, I don't know, this is what they did to you. Thank you.
I'd like to say that when I felt that he wasn't giving you guys enough room, I tried to say, follow up, what's going on. So whether he's not giving you enough room or not, you're given opportunities, in my opinion. That's why I was like, hey, you're going, just give him a second. You know, so I think you are getting time.
So to your point, it was taken back away. I love Ed. I helped fire Ed, but employees tried to respond and said, no, we're done talking. So that wasn't the case.
Well, before that point, but I think to Ed's point, they were kind of talking in circles a little bit, though.
The mission is being accomplished. This board's supposed to operate independent. It hasn't shown independence in the beginning. It was well orchestrated the first night. When I made a motion, it was talked over immediately, seconded and voted on, and vice versa. Everybody I talked to said, man, that was an orchestrated event, which is illegal, as the attorney will let you know.
Excuse me for a moment. What do you?
I made a
insinuate?
motion, well, I'm telling you what I'm saying is I made a motion to make Eric Lawson the chair. He made a motion to make you chair before the opportunity for a motion to fall, die, or get seconded. That's improper procedure. Then you made a motion for him. It seemed very orchestrated. I'm just saying, it's a miracle. It was very orchestrated. Okay? And then this, what I was hoping this board would do, we need to search for a CEO, because Mr. Conish is right. Our job is to hire him. I made that point. I referenced the law. I think that we should be out for a CEO. And, what I'd wish is that this board would be independent. If we're fulfilling Tallahassee's wish list that was put on TV and all that we fire him, we get a different chair, we quit playing footsies with the city. If you have run a business for a number of years, you have to deal with a lot of different people. That's what we're doing here. I was hoping that this board, I was really excited actually, that this board would actually go forward. And if Mr. Cunningham's not our CEO, I'm fine with that. I've told him that numerous times. That doesn't bother me, but I want to at least go out and get one. So who are we going to put at interim? So we're going to go out and find an interim, someone internal that's more qualified than him, or maybe we make you interim. You're my choice. And I told him that. I said, Tony, if you leave, I'm calling Ed. That's how much faith I have in you. I don't respect employees not being able to answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, can I address that?
Yes.
When an employee, anybody that's talking to the board, does not stay on topic and says they're using an absurdity to illustrate a point that we're making with a lot of validity. I spent a week looking at numbers. I looked at where these were derived. And they're saying, well, we can make any budget that we want. So there's a disrespect of the board and their authority. An employee is not allowed to take up airtime to just foolishly make statements because it didn't address the point. Mr. Cunningham didn't address the point of the over budgeting of the electric service. Instead, it was like, well, we do this 18 months in advance and we do this based on estimates. Well, you have an obligation to correct those estimates and you don't build upon those estimates. If you did that in your business that you had, you would have went out of business.
To your point, you're eliminating the rest of the board being able to hear what they say. Because in your mind, you're probably right. You're a guy at it. But it's just like you had this well prepared. The board member should have got this in backup. You shouldn't be coming in with something well prepared, well orchestrated, and then go poof. The public has a right for backup, and the board has a right for backup. So I personally would love to have this. But now staff can't respond to it except for in the spotlight and the gotcha moment.
Right.
And that's never, well, you didn't run the GRU like that. And I'm sure if we went over your budgets, you over budgeted something.
Oh, wait a second. I increased our expenses by 0.63% over that period of time because we have a bad business model at GRU, and that is we're growing at 1% a year. That's why you can't have your expenses grow by 8.5% a year.
I agree with you. I'm not saying, but I'm saying, I'm sure you over budgeted something, is what I said. I didn't say everything, sir. You can over budget $20 million in one thing and be flat or be neutral in 3%. You know, what I'm saying though is, if we're gonna ask the staff to be up here, no matter who they are, and if we're gonna have them answer questions on the cuff like this, and you already know your answers and we don't even get the ability to hear them, because what if the four of us think you're full of crap and they're right?
And that may well be
You're
the
taking
case.
that option away from us. You
no,
took
but-
it away by saying he can't speak and he can't speak. Because this board could make a motion and replace his chair like that, just like
fine.
that. So
That's fine.
what I'm saying though is, I love you. And I'm so excited, you can call bull crap on what I can't. But I don't think the employees deserve to be treated like that. And if it continues, the governor can take this and cram it. Because I don't want to be here anyhow.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I'm not treating anybody like this.
Well, I would say too, though, we were shoved into this budget, and I said a week ago, we haven't been we're not allowed to talk to each other, right?
Before.
So like, I don't have a clue realistically, other than the very few moments you guys have spoke, what you even want or what you even hope for. You know what I mean? We can't have a candid conversation. Is Tony doing a good job or not? I don't know. You know, I know what I'm sort of thinking. I have no clue what you guys are thinking. So there's no way for us to even talk before this. So we get foisted into this budget that I was told when I had my private budget meeting that none of these things can change and none of these things can decrease. So I'm assuming you guys were told the same thing. I don't know, and I couldn't even talk to you guys to find out if it can come down or not, because we're foisted into this heavy-handed budget with a bunch of crazy numbers. So it's impossible to even have a clue, other than unfortunately, how this conversation is going. Ed seems to be able to know, right? So we got to rely a lot on his information, but we should have been able to have a conversation first. But no, the first thing is, let's get this thick, heavy budget put in front of these guys so they're confused, and hopefully somebody just pushes it through. That's what I feel happened.
So what I would say is that, you know, when we talked to the general manager, we talked about bringing this and hoping to get head nods. Anybody that's worked with me knows I'm not a head nodder. I want to get into the detail. I think it's incredibly important to do that. And a lot of the inability to get this to anyone on time was that I wasn't getting information from the utility. So it's kind of like, yeah, I won't even get into that analogy.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
address that? Because I've heard that twice. I'm not aware of anything that we've not been able to provide you that you requested. We met last week, and I asked, is there anything that we haven't provided to you? You said no. There's nothing you haven't provided. So I'm unaware of what you're referring to in terms of not providing you information. And I would really like the opportunity to go through some of these other things and address them, and be able to address the items you brought up and what the status of them are. My intent and the way that I speak and the way that I think what my professional reputation is that I don't speak in circles. I don't talk around things. I'm telling you the way the straight talk of where they are. And so if I could have the opportunity to do that, I would really appreciate that, as you brought forward a number of things that I've never seen before that I would love to go through and address those. I just got to say, the budget that we have, the budget that we're putting isn't Tony Cunningham's budget. It is a budget, and we're running a utility to provide service to over 200,000 people, and it is critically important that we do that well. And I can help deliver that, and I think it's important in this time of transition for me to continue to do that. I recognize the need for a search, and I'm okay with that approach of doing the search, but I do not think it would be the best thing for our employees or our customers at this time to make a rapid change without any chance for us to walk through where we are as a utility and where we're going. That seems to me that is not a point to do at this time. So can I have an opportunity to please address the issues that were raised, and I'm going to talk as straight as possible on those issues and provide input to those issues.
I thought you already had.
No, I just started. I just started doing two of the issues and we stopped.
Okay.
So can I walk through that?
Well, it appears that it's the desire of the board for you to do exactly that.
So we talked about the 27 unfunded positions. I wasn't trying to talk around anything. What I was trying to get to is those are positions that are actual people that currently aren't in there, but they're actively being fulfilled. And, you know, it's a position that needs to be filled. It's an accountant. It's a operator. It's someone that goes out in the middle of the night to address issues. Those are positions that are actively being filled. And when we have turnover, you have retirement, you have people leave the organization, you're constantly filling those back in. And so, and I can provide more information in that in the future as needed. The over budgeting of electric service, I can assure you with 100% certainty, there was nothing, we weren't trying to pad a budget. We weren't trying to put extra money there that we know we're not going to spend. That is not the intent. The intent is to try to predict what your electric service is going to be in the future. And so we do the best we can to do that based on past performance and based upon projected demand or projected fuel adjustment. And those things come together to determine what that budget is. And so we do the best we can to make that prediction going forward. Now, at the end of the day, if we're wrong, if we over budgeted that, those funds go right back to reducing debt or debt relief into the future of the utility. Those funds are not lost. They go into reserves, and then those reserves, after we meet target, are used to reduce debt going forward. But the intent is not to over budget that. It is to correctly budget for it. The zero-based budgeting impacts you brought up here as another example. So we do start and we build our budget of what do we need to deliver the service. And we rely upon the experts in the different areas of the utility. I am not an expert at each and every area of the utility. We rely on utility professionals to bring forward those budgets, to put together a budget that delivers the service level that we're asking for and the reliability that our customers, I think, very much appreciate. So that's the budget we bring from them. We then have cut those budgets and reduced expenses in those proposed budgets, to your point, and brought that to a level that, again, meets that level of standard that we have set. Eliminating, you talked about the IRP contract services. Eric can talk a little bit more, but it's an RFSQ. It's to look at people, we have not decided anything. That is perfectly clear. We are not moving forward. We're not trying to do something unknown to the board. We put out the RFSQ to gather additional information. So as we have the IRP discussions, we have as much information as possible for decision-making for the board. When we did the analysis, all the analysis had the gas as an option, so we wanted to make sure we had enough information going forward for the board as we enter the IRP discussions that we can answer your questions about costs associated with that. Am I missing anything there?
Yeah, no, I'd just like to add that this RFSQ is just that. It's a statement for qualifications. There is zero commitment to cost. There is zero commitment to schedule. There is zero commitment to move forward with anyone that is evaluated. So we have not made a decision on anything. What this does is this allows us to move forward in the process. This is the first step in the purchasing process, yes. But the statement of qualifications is just that. Who is qualified to do this work? It allows us to get intel from the market. It also puts us in a position that no matter what we do, we have a resource that we could then potentially go out and contract with and then have them as a resource for us, whether it is PPAs, whether it is batteries, whether it is natural gas, all of that. So this statement of qualifications, again, I want to make it very clear. It is just a statement of qualifications. No commitment, no cost. And so also, I like to...
You do pick a bidder.
I don't have to.
Right.
I don't have to.
Right.
No commitment, no cost.
And if we did, that would come to the board. We're not skipping a step for the board. We're just getting that information to be able, we got to keep going with business, right? There's been this transition of these different boards. We have to keep the business moving forward. That is an action to keep the business moving forward.
Well, no, I mean, wait a second. Part of that statement of qualifications specifically talks about what you're wanting to do, and it certainly does not go, okay, shake your head. What don't I understand?
Sorry, go ahead and finish, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So it doesn't say what we want to do. It's evaluating the options that have come out as some of the highest options through the IRP process so far. So it's not what we want to do, it is potential options, and we want to make sure we have the resources as we get to the point as a board and making that decision, that we have the resources to do it. But we are not moving forward and spending money and doing any of that related to that. We are simply getting the things lined up, so when we get to the point to do that, we'll have that information for the board to make decisions.
Good point. So what's the $500,000 in sustainability's contract services?
Sure, I can answer that question. So we do have $500,000. Part of that is in the planning department, which is what the IRP, part of the sustainability that the IRP is funded out of, okay? And so part of that is looking at federal grants. We've talked about grants that come back to the money. This is a once in a generational time for federal money to address some of the issues that we have that can offset O&M expenses, that can offset capital expenses. So we decided that we are prioritizing. We're not just carte blanche shooting things out in the ether and hoping they come back. We are prioritizing grants to go out and try to offset the cost that we know we're going to incur anyway. So part of that, we just submitted a GRIP grant, which is a grid resiliency and improvement grant, to help offset in the upwards of $20 or $30 million to offset costs that we're going to have to do in our system anyway. So we've prioritized those funds. That's about 100,000 of that. We've also looked at an electric distribution system hosting capacity study that goes directly to how much solar we can host on our system. Does it strain our system? Do we need to redesign our system? Because as people add more solar to their rooftops, as more solar comes into our system, it has an effect. That system was designed to flow power one way, which is from a power plant out to a customer. Well, now you're putting things in the system that are pushing it the other way. It's doing something it was not designed to do. And so as we look at that, we have to make sure that the designs in our system are correct. That's another 100,000 of that. We have 100,000 for time of use billing system programming. We're looking at changing our rates to be more effective, to help offset cost, right? To incentivize people to use less energy, to offset the peak, which then in turn lowers the capital expenditures and lowers our requirement for us to provide power during the peak. It is a savings for us. So we've set aside $100,000 to study that and implement that to make sure that it's done the right way. And also a part of that is also looking at any future studies that may have to come from the IRP. Have we identified all of those? No, we haven't. But we've cut even that part back dramatically because there may be things that have to do with DSM, demand side management, that help customers use more or use less. It's looking at how we implement some of these things to make sure that we're using it effectively. So that $500,000 is not going to a new gas unit. It's not going to engineering firm. It is going to look at things that increase our efficiency, increase our grid resiliency, and make sure that we are making the right plans for the future as this utility industry changes, because it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And we are not doing prudent business if we are not planning for that strategically in the long term. And so that is what that $500,000 is for. I'd also like to clarify.
Before you do that, before you say that, you've already said that you don't have all of that identified. The $500,000 is for things also that are yet to be determined.
Correct.
There's a placeholder there.
Correct.
And how much is that?
It's about $150,000.
Okay, so there's $150,000 there. Were all the funds used in the previous budget? There was $500,000 last year, right?
Correct. So some of that went towards conducting the IRP and other studies that we had, other grant opportunities that we used. There's software packages in there. There's all those things that support that. So,
Right.
So yes.
Right. So, but that's, when you ask for $5 million in reductions, you expect those types of things to be scrutinized. And you don't put contingencies in the budget, particularly when you have a board that's constructed this way. A budget doesn't have to come to us at the beginning of the year and stays there through the rest of the year. If things change during the course of the year, come and get a modification. Say, this is what we're doing. But that's not what's happening. And there hasn't been this free flow of information back to the board to help them with things that are fairly complicated. You know, I am familiar with it, and that's why I'm trying to, help with that flow of information at this level. So just in your explanation of this shows me, $150,000 out of $500,000 is 30%. I'm sorry.
No, it's,
Computer freaked out.
Oh, okay, sorry.
it's a time to.
So, and I remember how many iterations we had to go through when we looked at budgets during my tenure here. And there were some tough decisions. And I hoped in most of these cases, to Mr. Carter's point, to Director Carter's point, you know, you tried to make sure there wasn't any fluff in any of those. But this, in my mind, went beyond fluff. It also went beyond, what did? I mean, if there's 150,000 in there, you can make a face, but $150,000 and $500,000 is fluff. You come back to ask for more. That's the way the system operates. If not, you're asking for millions of dollars from customers before they're due. Because why do you actually even have a budget for the utility? Why do you have it? Does it stop you from spending over it? Anybody? Yeah. Does it spend you from over? Can you spend over the budget? Sure you can. There's nothing that says ding, 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 ding. Oh, we can't spend anymore. It's for rate making. It's for how much you charge the customer. And that's what House Bill 1645 is about. We're supposed to be protecting the customer as well as the utility system. And I'm not hearing any deference to the customer. I'm hearing deference to the fact that I've cut conversation off because you're going in circles. And even when I brought it up earlier, Director Carter, you were kind of like, well, yeah, I know about that, but I'm worried about what happens with the city. Well, I was tasked with the adherence to House Bill 1645. Go ahead.
We were tasked, actually. You were the ones that cut them off. We didn't get to hear. I like that I heard the explanations. It helps me. You have a unique situation here. You know what's going on. You know what's underneath the rocks. We don't. So if it's going to be the Ed Blarski show and you just tell them what to do and we don't really get to have a conversation, it's going to be tough. And the public has the right to hear that. So they can call bull crap or bull crap, okay? You might be 1,000% right. And I'm glad that you're sitting here because you can turn over the rocks. And I like the fact, if you need more money, come to us, let's justify it. I got that. But without him breaking down that 500 grand, it didn't mean much. Because it was actually, I interpreted it a lot different from what you said and what he said, and you're agreeing with him more or less. So there is some wisdom for the rest of the board being participating in this.
Oh, but I'm not agreeing with the whole idea of proceeding because
No,
this
I
has
said that.
momentum.
Well, what I'm saying is that it was broken down. I was under the impression when you stopped him, this was for gas generation, that 500 grand. That wasn't all the way. So that's what I'm saying, sir. So you are ultra smart. Okay, I love that you're here. I love that you're going to be able to tweak us here and there, and you're 100% right. But the rest of the board needs to be able to hear from the people in the public need to hear. Okay?
Yeah.
And like I said,
that's a
you're
good
so
point.
smart, and you are. I'm not blowing smoke up you because I've known you for a lot of years. That's why I talked to you the night after, and it's no big secret now. I talked to you the night after I was appointed, and I asked you, if Tony blows up, will you come in and be the interim? If I didn't believe in you, I wouldn't do that. And when the people in Tallahassee and the people in the news media said, what do you think of Blarski? I said, this is cool because he can call bull crap and back it up, but the rest of the board needs to hear it. Okay, that's all I'm asking, sir.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
and didn't I open it up for
Yeah,
further
you
discussion?
did now after we threatened to take you outside and beat you, but
Well,
other than that.
well, that's true.
Mr.
Can I
But-
continue? Can I continue?
Sorry.
Can I continue on the items that were brought up?
Yes, sir.
So SLAs were brought up during the presentation here. So a couple of things, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but basically what we did was over the course of the year, and we're continuing to do this, is we went through and started evaluating all the SLAs and MOUs. We included that in the packet that you were provided. So you should have all that information on each SLA and MOU and sort of the status of it and our recommendation of what to do. So what we did with the previous board is we immediately reduced some of the services that the city was providing by $1.4 million in fiscal year '24. So we did that immediately, and that reduction is in place. And then what we did is identified several other things, and I'm I was going off of memory, I was trying to remember, but one of them was stopping the Connect Free program. One of them was street lights, reducing the payment on street lights. One was connectivity, GrewCom connectivity that we weren't charging for. And I know I'm missing a couple, I just can't think off the top of my head. But, so those were things that we identified, to your point of, are we addressing SLAs? Yes. Those are the ones we identified for fiscal year '25. And then the bigger, broader ones, we're continuing to work on those that would essentially impact fiscal year '26. So not making any other major changes to how we interact with those shared services at this time. So we reduced the 1.4 million. We identified additional items that we're going to reduce in fiscal year '25, and then the remaining items we're continuing to work through for fiscal year '26. So I just wanted to follow up on that piece.
But the reality is you've not brought back a single SLA or MOU that's been executed.
Right, so what we did was.
You've been talking about making adjustments.
Correct. We made the adjustments of 1.4 million.
Right, which occurred before October 4th, 2023.
No, that was February of 2024.
The board did that just recently. That was the second to last meeting I think we had as the board.
Yes, February of 2024. And then in February or March, it might have been March, we brought back additional things for fiscal year 2025. And then we said on the remaining SLA MOUs, we're going to look at modifying those for fiscal year '26. And so, looking at the other big pieces, we talked a little bit about fleet and HR and all these other bigger pieces, that evaluating the service level that we're providing and to determine what the best course of action going forward is. So I'm trying to go back through and see
and keep thinking
if I missed anything.
The reality is that we're taking a loss in, the IT SLA for fiscal year 2024. We should not have done that at all. It's a violation of House Bill 1645. So that still concerns me that there's no recoupment of that from the city.
Can I address that?
Yep.
So with the ITSLA, I can't remember exactly, from 2011 until prior to fiscal year '24, we were recovering from general government $1.4 million or less for our IT services. And so we looked at, hey, we're not recovering all the costs for the IT services. So
Well, you didn't have to do that because we had conversations with general government and they said, we don't care what you want at that point. And everyone should understand that's the problem with having the city control GRU. When it comes to those SLAs, GRU has no leverage over the city as, with the general manager who is reporting to a city commission, because they're not going to make changes, they're not going to take money out of their pockets. So when you mention that, you have to get the proper context of that as well. We looked at trying to get more money. We had an open SLA with the city for years, and they told us to pound sand. We're not signing that. When House Bill 1645 came into play, it solved that problem for future generations of general managers at GRU, because it gave you the leverage to go back and say, hey, I can't sign something for a loss. And that's my whole point here, isn't the whole element that you brought forward, but the $3 million that's still left that you have leverage on, that we're losing money on. And, they've already acknowledged they should do it for fiscal year '25. They're getting the service in fiscal year '24. They should pay for that too. So it doesn't obfuscate the fact that, it's a wrong decision to have a loss on an SLA for IT services with the city. But go ahead, you can respond to that too.
So we were faced with, historically, we weren't recovering the costs. Last year, we worked on an SLA, identified the different items of the SLA. We took the 1.4 million payment to $2.9 million, moving forward with general government. We identified, look, there's this gap. They didn't agree with the methodology of how to allocate. And so we went back and forth on that methodology. What we agreed to was do 1 year where we're doubling what we're recovering. and then the following year move to the full amount, or they go out and find other IT services. Now, the challenge that we have, the very real challenge is if they go out and find other IT services, anything we're recovering from them, a lot of our expenses are fixed costs. And so we're not necessarily going to be able to, I don't think at all, we're going to be able to reduce our expenses commensurate with a reduction in revenue from general government. And so that is a concern that it is in the best interest of GRU to continue to provide service and be paid for that service. And so what we're doing right now is trying to work toward that. They are having Berry and Dunn, a company, come in and evaluate the IT services, and then from there, identify going forward what the scope is that we will provide to to general government for IT services. So that's the status of where we are right now. And, we need to evaluate that path going forward, but the path we're on here is going from this year to the full 5.89 and then evaluating going forward beyond that from the Berry and Dunn analysis. And then I think we addressed everything with the RFSQ. We're not spending funds there. SLA MOUs. I'll touch briefly you touched on natural gas rebates. So last year, we evaluated natural gas rebates. It's $250,000. Almost every single provider of natural gas has rebates. What you're doing there is you're really providing a rebate to lock in a customer to buy your natural gas going forward. And so it's a very common practice. There is competition in the natural gas market. It's not, people have to have infrastructure there to provide it. And so it helps to guarantee your return on any investment you have with providing the natural gas. And so in that evaluation, we recommend continue to have natural gas rebates going forward as an incentive to really increase our revenue in the natural gas system. It's not a perfect system. There may be opportunities where we can recover more of that cost from the natural gas, but I wanted to give that explanation of the reason we have those rebates.
Yeah, I was part of that discussion a few years ago as well, and we found that there was a feeling that, folks would engage in that, and it was basically a giveaway to developers. There were differing opinions even within the gas department for that.
Gotcha.
So if you talk to some folks there, that's why I looked at that from a much different perspective.
And
Okay.
so
Anything else you'd like to
I don't
address?
know if I missed anything else going through. So I don't know if did I miss anything?
No,
Does anybody-
you talked about the unfunded positions. You think that that's a little too high. You're saying that, you already took, I think I can say that you've taken 20 positions already, taken them out of authorized. You went from like 920 something to 903, I think, some number like that, right?
That's correct.
You're not, I'm a little concerned about your explanation about electric services. There seems to be this idea, and I wrote it down because it was like, it hit me like, if it's overcharging customers, it goes to get debt reduction anyway.
No, so
You said that.
can I clarify that, please? That is not how I look at it. What I was describing was we're trying to do the best we can to predict what that energy cost will be. If we happen to be off, I just wanted to be clear, it's not like you're taking that money and going doing something different. If we're over collecting in any way, that is going to go to reserves. Once we hit reserve targets, we're making it go to debt relief. I think that is a very important distinction for the board, that we have a debt management policy that if that occurs, that money doesn't go somewhere else. It goes toward reserves and it goes toward debt relief. That's the point I was making. I'm not flippant about it. I was not saying, it doesn't matter at all. It is extremely important, and we really try to do predictive modeling to determine what those electric costs are. But if we happen to be off, that's what happens. And
My antenna went up with the electric services because it was structured in a way that you could see there was actual, then there was a budget created.
Okay.
And then you walked off a budget, And it's exactly why you need zero budgeting. So it goes to process. And adherence to process is incredibly important in managing all the complexities of this organization. And I am sure, because of that process, because it exists there, it's existing in other places. The exception proves the rule.
So,
I mean, Eric Walters just said it with the $500,000. Well, we have 150 in there that's not allocated. It's the same thing. You got to get into business management principles. You can't have that in. There's two items that I've identified, and each one of those has, if you will, fluff in it, mistakes in it. You can have all the consternation you want about it, but I have 46 years that shows me that this is the case. And I'm looking at the aggregate numbers. And you want to talk about, you reduced the amount that the budget was asked to be increased, and you're still at the highest level of budgets on O&M, capital, shake your head no, but if you combine capital expenditures and O&M together, $298 million, highest in the history of GRU. And all I hear is that we need all this money for a reliable system, we can't cut anything, and yet there's $12 million here that you could argue might not be a total of $12 million, but it's certainly a 9, 8, something like that, without looking at anything else. And yet, and that's the concern that I have here, is what we got from the general manager was the hand. Shake your head again, no, but you said in our private meetings, and you said on the floor, we can't make any reductions, and you said it today. And Mr. Goodman said the same thing. You know, we can't make any more reductions without impacting the reliability of the system. And that's the canary in the coal mine for me when I hear that. Oh, we can't do anything else. We need more money. What about productivity? What about efficiency? What about AMI that was supposed to be reducing additional folks? The process was supposed to relieve that. I'm not seeing any impact of that yet. Maybe it will come forward, but the efficiencies aren't there. And what you've said doesn't change the process that is being inartfully employed, scientifically as well, and it doesn't change the impact for me. Now, maybe the other board members think it does.
Mr. Chair, may I also interject? I think we have some staff that may also want to speak to the motion, if that's all right.
Oh,
to address the electric service, most of the electric service is driven by water wastewater.
Right.
Debbie Doherty is the water wastewater officer and who developed that budget. So
okay, sure.
I just wanted to speak to the budgets that we built in water, wastewater, and the fact that it's not all about actuals and looking backwards. You have to understand the current flow rates at the plants that are happening, and you don't use the same numbers you used 2 years ago. And I wanted to make sure to point out that our budgets are built on, yes, looking at actual flow rates and our past history of what we've used. They are also built on our system flow rates we expect. They also are built on our current contract prices, which are significantly higher than they have ever been. Would love for BFA to present what their procurement department is getting back on contracts. Our grounds maintenance contract just went up $2,000 a cut. It was $3,600 a cut. It is $5,600 a cut right now to get the lawn mowed. So, I mean, it is astronomical, the increases we have had. And I don't think you're taking any of that into account when you're criticizing the O&M costs. So I just wanted to make sure that y'all understand that there are other factors that go into building our budgets. And then on the people side, for water, wastewater, the FTEs, we froze 3 FTEs last year. Those were cut from our budget in FY25. Are there other positions that I can give you to freeze and take later? No. Not unless you want to change our level of service. I feel like we have cut, we are at 161 right now in water, wastewater. We have 15 people operating our water plant. I mean, for the health and safety of this community, we have got to maintain our level of staffing at these facilities. So I just wanted to make those points so that the entire board is aware of how we budget and how we plan our personnel.
Thank you.
Mr.
Chair,
Chair.
there's one thing that I've noticed as well, and, looking at the actuals so far to this year is, and historically, that the different departments, having worked on the other side and other businesses, and even on the state level, is at the end of the year, those last 3 months, that last quarter, per se, everybody's in a scramble to spend the money. They don't want to see a cut out of the budget. So that is one of my concerns as well, when I've been reviewing everything, is we have some of these actuals are looking, and they're not even at 50%. So, like the chair said, there has to be some float in there that we can be looking at, and not just transferring that year to year. So we need to be looking at those actuals a little bit more closely and making sure, as an organization, that you are tasking your department heads with spending that money more realistically and not waiting to the end and then going into panic mode that now we're going to come to the end of our budget cycle and we need to spend this money, otherwise this authority is going to pull our money away from us. I've seen it time and time and time again over 20 years, and it's not appropriate.
So let me address that. So we see that. So we have, and actually the supplemental information that I wanted to share really has a lot of that analysis in there. But we do see spending as we get to the end of the fiscal year. Our budgets are fiscal year, October 1 to September 30th. And so we do see spending at the end. We are continuing to analyze precisely what drives that. What I will say from talking to our officers and the folks that manage each of those lines of business, that most of the time what's happening is you have POs, invoices that you have done throughout the year. And as you get into September, you got to make sure you're closing those POs, so you're paying the expenses you did in that year in the correct fiscal year. And so there's a lot of activity of closing POs and making sure those invoices are paid as you approach the end of the fiscal year. The other thing that occurs is there are times when you have a budget, let's say for gravel. So you have that budget for gravel, you're holding some of that budget as you go toward the end of the fiscal year, and then you're making sure you get that load of gravel by the end of the fiscal year. And part of the reason you're holding some of that is directly to the chair's point. We don't have a lot of contingency in our budget, that is just sitting there waiting for something to happen. And so the reality of hurricane season, the reality of storm season, is that there may be a storm that comes and we're going to need to respond to it, and there are going to be expenses. So some of that is the activity. And I don't know.
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit from an operational perspective so you do see that seasonality. Absolutely. For the fiscal year period, 10, 11, 12, right? And so 12 kind of peaks out. But the other thing that is important is period 1 in the next fiscal year, right? So many of our facilities don't have a month-long tank, right? You got a 2-week tank, and you got to get chemicals. But you don't get the PO for the next year until November, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to fill up your tank to make it to the next PO for the next year. And so if you look at the averaging of the period 12 to the period 1, it looks really similar. It goes to your point, Chair. It's about process. So we have particular process we go through to close the year. And so you end the year with one PO. You can't charge anything till you get your next PO, and that's a 3 to 4 week period. If you're sitting there operating a facility that doesn't have a month-long tank, you better fill the tank up, or you're not going to produce clean drinking water. You're not going to treat wastewater. You're not going to be able to provide reliable services. So our operational managers understand our processes to navigate what they need when they need it. Now, the other thing that drives that is there are a lot of things that happen in period 10, 11, 12. They're called tropical storms and hurricanes. We have a lot of upward spending. We top off tanks with every tropical season. So, man, you're going to inherently create more expense just to keep those tanks elevated to keep reliable service. I mean, that's just the nature of the process. Are there ways we can improve? Absolutely. But I would encourage, making that process better and more efficient to, as soon as the month closes, we get POs for the next year, you'll see some of that expense transition out.
And to the chair's point, just everybody needs to remember that A budget is a framework. It can constantly change. You're going to have overruns, you're going to have discrepancies, and that's when you come back to us and we discuss it with you all. And I will tell you why I didn't second the motion, just to be totally transparent with the authority. I agree that we need to have a general manager, CEO. We need to go through the search. I don't necessarily think, I mean, we were here to discuss the budget. And I understand that some things we don't know, like Craig Carter said, I don't know what I don't know. I don't necessarily know what questions to ask, which is where we rely on you, Mr. Chair. But we also need to hear from these employees, just to echo what Director Carter said. So with that, that's why I just don't think the timing is right, just to outright fire the general manager. I think we need to go through that process. I understand your concerns. I do have concerns myself, but I just don't think that that timing is right. And who are we going to get to replace the current general manager if we go down that road today? That is another concern that I have, because I don't want us to be in a 2-2 deadlock like we were in a previous board. If, for instance, you go, well, I'd be more than happy to take the interim role. I don't want to be in that situation to where we can't move forward as a board, and even if we have an interim GM, and if it was you, Mr. Chair, then we could be deadlocked, and then we have no movement whatsoever. We're deadlocked again, and nothing moves forward.
To that point, without my interjection here, you'd be looking possibly at approving that budget with no O&M reductions. What's better?
No, I appreciate that you're bringing this knowledge
Can't get a
forward.
budget brought to us that works.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the
I mean-
problem.
Exactly.
That's the
Well-
problem. Can't get a budget that's brought to us that works.
And
That's the
so,
problem.
so we're sitting here talking about everything but, with all due respect, Mr. Cunningham, you know, folks are bringing in anecdotal answers for systematic problems. You know, we're talking about making sure tanks are filled, and that's why the budget goes up 30% in the last month of the year. I mean, it's more than that. And that's what these 7 or 8 different points were about. I mean, it's statistical. If I can point to these things looking at the budget, do you think that's all that's wrong there? And I am deeply, deeply disturbed and offended that you looked at the budget and point blank said, no, we can't reduce O&M. We cannot reduce it, and doubled down on top of that and said, we need that to provide reliable service.
So what I would say is, what we did was, we did reduce budget over the last couple of years. When it was asked to reduce further budget, what I'm bringing back to you is I'm recommending not reducing the budget because it'll have an impact on reliability and level of service. We can do that. We can reduce that. I mean, we gave some examples. You know, we line millions of dollars of sewer every year. We do tree trimming every year. We can reduce those budgets. We can say, so I could have brought back and said, yep, let's just reduce $2.5 million out of each of those. Mission accomplished. What I'm bringing back is realistically, what does that mean? I have to tell you what the output of that is. I can't act like the output's not going to happen. And so there is an output where you're taking on a significant risk and you're reducing that level of service and reliability. That's what I'm bringing to you as the utility experts within this utility, the people that do this job every day. That's the feedback. And so I'm bringing that to you. I'm not saying we can choose to reduce the budget further. There will be impacts from doing that.
Okay.
Which people to do the
Wait
job every
wait a
day.
second. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're
but
good. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm talking about this sheet of information. Okay. I'm talking about not filling vacant positions where somebody's not already there. There's nothing in there about consumables. There's nothing in there about tree trimming. There's nothing in there. So you're creating an argument out of thin air. No, don't let me finish here. There's no substance to what you're saying. There's no person that's going to lose their job. You mistakenly over-budgeted electric services. You haven't sought recovery on the IT SLA. There's zero budgeting impacts. Your manager of the water department said, we don't look at actual, we just look at what we are looking at. You know, I'm sorry, but you have to look at the actual to see what you actually spent in the past, and then you make the comparison.
That's exactly what we do.
It's not what she said. And then when you go the line by line, that's why you need the actuals. And then eliminating the IRP contract services, reducing professional services, there is fluff in there. So you're not addressing those issues. Now, you can respond, and I'm sorry, you can.
No, like,
Just real quick, if you don't mind, just as some of us haven't sat in a lot of meetings, just to keep the chair online, just say, Mr. Chair, may I speak? Instead of us talking out directly, and I think that will help, so.
I think that's
I'm
what
not trying
happened
to
with the whole, I spoke, named him. I didn't know the thing wasn't dead. I don't know nothing about none of this. It was a free-for-all almost, so.
Well,
I apologize.
Yeah, well,
I mean, that's what's going on.
as long as I wasn't chair, I didn't give a crap,
All right, yeah.
okay, I can tell you that.
So, go ahead.
No, the professionals that are giving the information, are you talking about like people actually doing the job or just management or who? Because I think that GRU has the best people when it comes like the gas people that are actually, I've been told that by like some gas companies here, like, oh, there's the best guy. I think they have the best linemen, right? I think that the people with the boots on the ground are the best in the state. I agree with that. I hear a lot of complaints through the community about management and about the only customer service. This high level of service. The customer service at that window downstairs is pretty bad from what I hear. We get a whole bunch of that. You guys don't care if somebody can't pay their bill, blah, blah, blah. But to what you're saying, as far as the feedback you're getting from your people, I think that they're doing an awesome job in the jobs. The management, we are getting some questions from the community about that, or some, not even questions direct, like they're not doing what they're supposed to. You know what I mean? People not just you, people underneath you. So, I don't know, just make sure you're getting your intel from the right people.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
May
sir.
I speak?
Yes.
So, the way I conduct myself on this board is we do a lot of work before the board meeting. We spend a lot of time with the leadership. We have a chance to ask our questions. If I have something that I'm interested to socialize with the board, I ask Mr. Cunningham and his staff, is this something you consider building into your presentations? For example, I had questions on how the budget was presented, and they made modifications, and it allowed us to look at it a little bit differently. I do not subscribe to surprises, and I said it in the last board meeting, and last time I was on this board. I feel like this has been a surprise. I appreciate your questions. I would rather you spend the time with them, show them your analysis and your questions, and then allow them to bring it back. Now, if they bring it back and they don't properly address your questions, then that's when you lean in. But this process where they've never seen it, they don't understand what we're talking about, I don't think it helps me get educated, because I appreciate your analysis, but I want to hear, I mean, they're all experts too. I mean, they've been in the field too. So I would rather have a more balanced discussion. I'm completely open to pushing on the budget. The thing is they weren't dealt a fair hand. That they have basically a month and a half to bring a board up to speed to vote on a budget where there's only one of us who's an expert in the industry. That's not a fair hand. We've all said the budget can be modified. We've basically got the next 12 months to really dig in, educate ourselves, push on different things that we're interested in. And so that's why I don't understand why in our third board meeting we're making a motion to terminate the leadership. I can tell you when I was charged with that task before, and having discussions with the national recruiter, he said, you are really going to have trouble finding a talent to come here. First, they're going to the investor-owned utilities because those aren't politicized. He said, second, they're going to look and watch your videos, and they're going to, who's going to come to work here? And so my hope was we would go a year, we would get through the politicalness of a lot of this, we would all get better educated, and by the end of the year, we would all have a much better assessment of the leadership team and the CEO. And so that's sort of my perspective. So I don't support terminating the CEO. I support allowing them to bring these questions back. We do have a deadline. We have to vote on a budget, but we've all agreed we can go and modify the budget. And so that's my perspective on the vote.
Well, let me just, and I appreciate that. The one thing that I would correct is that we did send him off with instruction, and that was to reduce $5 million. And so to give that short shrift and say, well, we didn't when we did, and then wholeheartedly came back with nothing. That's what I suspected might happen, so I did my own homework to see what would happen. And that's been met with indignation that how dare I put the general manager out there because he failed to follow what I think is inherent in the job. And you're hearing it from the folks that are talking. They're sitting there saying, listen, we need this money. It's still not that acknowledgement of the electric services as a mistake. And it's a big mistake. It's $3 million. And the same thing with the unfunding of the positions.
But the questions you're asking, though, in what you're challenging them on, yeah, you can change the budget, but it's always at risk, right? So let's say they under budget the electric cost and it comes in higher, then we just make you're just trying to get the budget adjusted to have different optics, it appears to me.
No, you might want to listen to what I said about rate making. This is not like a budget at the hospital or other folks. I mean, you
But we
charge based on
proposed a zero
Medicare.
rate increase, so it's not going into the rates. I mean, what you've directed and what
No,
we've all
there's-
directed, there is no rate increase next year.
We're
So it's
talking
not,
about.
so it's not hitting the ratepayers.
I just came up with $100 to $125 million that could go to debt reduction.
You talked about passing it along to the customers. You didn't talk about
We-
debt reduction.
I certainly said one or the other. So,
No, I just remember you talking about passing it on to the customers.
well,
And again, these are the kinds of debates we need to have, but not in a meeting where we have a deadline. And I appreciate your questions, I really do. Your analysis are thought-provoking. But I believe we need to allow the staff to have a chance to also give their perspective on these things.
and I wish they would address the actual numbers that I'm giving them and not anecdotal information about how inflation has went up by X, and therefore we need all this additional money. Because the budget is built on a line-by-line basis, and payroll is one of the largest ones, and I want to pay for people that are actually there as FTEs. And by the way, I said estimated 100 million to 125 million of expenditure reduction for rate relief and/or debt reduction over the next decade. So you're talking about is third as much that we already have set aside for debt defeasance, and you're sitting there saying, oh, well, it's okay. I don't understand the philosophy, I'm sorry. I come from a different background, but you're welcome to your opinion, thank you. Any other?
Mr. Chair, just a quick question. I don't remember, did we instruct him to cut 5 million? Or did you instruct him last time to cut 5 million?
What I presented here
No, I'm
was
saying, the last meeting, you
I know.
said we instructed him to cut 5 million and he failed to do it. I was just asking.
That was what we talked about that night.
But we took a
And-
vote and instructed him
Well,
to cut
I
5
asked him if he
million.
can get it done. He said he didn't know if he can get it done by the 5th.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, so I don't want to hold somebody hostage for something that wasn't voted.
Yeah, no, like,
Yeah,
we'll
so-
get it out
So
there.
that's all
I think-
I'm doing.
I think it was possible austerity measures to reduce O&M and/or capital expenses. And so you asked, Director Haslam, you'd asked if I could get it done. My response was, we can get the analysis done, absolutely. What I didn't know just off the cuff was, can we reduce those dollars?
No, I'm not
And
saying you
so-
said that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So what I tried to bring back, I'm not being indignant. I'm not taking it lightly what the discussion was on reducing those. We came back to the staff of what can we reduce? We have a very short period of time to turn these things around, to do the modeling, do all the analysis to get back to the board. And so what we did was we looked at, okay, what have we been doing over the last couple of years? And we've been reducing it. So I don't want the narrative that we haven't been reducing those expenses. And inflationary costs have gone up. I've got to tell the reality of what's happened. The cost of so many items that we do are chemicals, electricity, when the fuel adjustment went up, materials, everything has gone up drastically. Every bid we put out is more than bids we had a couple of years ago. So that's the reality of what we're seeing. So we've adjusted to that by doing different measures to reduce costs, but costs have risen significantly. And so I do think it's prudent for us to reduce as many of those costs as possible. And then ultimately, there is some of that increased cost that should be recovered through our customers. And so that's a reality, to continue to provide the level of service that we have recommended and as part of our mission. Now, again, if it's worth a discussion and an analysis for us to look at, do we want to reduce the level of service? Do we want to reduce reliability and that improve, or to reduce expenses? But you have to walk very systematically into that. And I do not recommend to do that this year. I would recommend we continue this discussion as we go into next fiscal year. And to your point, Chair, we could potentially do something in the middle of the year. We have not historically done that. We have historically then planned for the next fiscal year. But as the board comes on board and gets more information and more understanding, we could come back at a later date in the year. So I just want to be clear. I was not ignoring the requests. We brought back options related to that, and I'm bringing back the reality of what that analysis showed in terms of those reductions.
Before Director Carter says something, I just want to that point. Do you remember when the City Commission asked us to reduce expenses? They asked for $7 million. I gave them an entire sheet of areas they could cut. And I talked about exactly what you're talking about, but said that it's our obligation to improve productivity and efficiencies so that that doesn't happen.
Right.
And what I also told them was that GRU exists in a business paradigm, a business model, which we're growing at less than 1%.
Right.
So if our expenses, anyone can answer this, if our expenses are growing 5 and 6% and our revenue is growing by 1% without increases, what happens to the customer base? We have an absolutely dismal business model. And so to correct that, the only way you can do that is with productivity enhancements, efficiencies, and reducing costs below that level. And instead, we have the highest budget in GRU history. I don't understand the board not understanding that. I mean, this is how you would react to this business statement. If you're going and getting your MBA, and this is the business case that's presented to you, head ski case, you would look at this and you would address these systematic inconsistencies in the model. We can't grow our way so that the customers of GRU are battered every year. I mean, we're getting a window of time with the GFT, with the $68 million. The general manager should be aware that you have that 1% growth in revenue, 5 or 6% growth in costs, and you have to hammer those costs. Instead, what I'm hearing is, well, you know, we'll adjust it here. You know, it will work out. Holy cow, folks. This is not how you run a business. This is not what you do.
Mr. Chair.
And I'm sorry if I'm excited about this, but I've never run a business like
You kept most of
this.
it secret to yourself, so we're just getting up to speed, so give us a minute.
So, Mr. Chair, can I address that? So you talked about the budget. So that is the capital expenditures are what are really driving that, what you just put out there. in terms of the
Your
overall.
operating expenses have went from $131 million to $151 million, or $133 million to $155 million. I showed that slide the first day I was here, and you talk about cutting expenses.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not happening, Tony.
Yeah, so can I go to, so I referenced this earlier to go through some of the additional information.
The board wants you to do whatever you have to, so I'm not going to stop you.
I'd love to see an analysis, Mr. Chair, I apologize. I'd love to see an analysis, us compared to other munis and how they accelerated through COVID, because if I'm not mistaken, chlorine went up 200-300%, if we could even get it.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I used to buy a quarter pounder for $1.50, now it's $3. Okay. Everything hit during COVID, and I'm not using that as an excuse. The stuff you're bringing forward is good stuff. You're getting pissed off at us because we're not on your page and you brought us a snapshot in a sneak move. Don't get mad at me because you snuck something under the table. Bring me up to speed. I would love for you to sit down with staff and get every number you need. And this is one of the best discussions I've had on budget. You know that? Because people are on edge and people are talking. So I applaud you for that. But don't come in and sneak in and then say, you're bored. I can't believe you're not on my page. Well, hell, I just got the page. Okay. You know, come on.
And I thought it was pretty clear, by the way. And
It doesn't matter. You snuck it in.
It's not sneaking anything in. It's addressing, I didn't have the numbers till this morning when I'm pulling this together because I'm not getting information from the general manager.
I almost want to fire you to put you out of your misery. Do you know that? I almost want to fire you to put you out of your misery.
What information?
Because they're told what to do and that's what's going to happen.
I need to understand what information.
Well, you know,
being provided.
we're talking about a member over here that has actual data that he's comparing things to. I didn't get that information. I've asked for actual information. I'm talking about, you know, line by line type of information. I talked to you about that.
How did you get it?
I requested it and asked that he forward it on to the rest of the.
Every member got that information.
And we still have our portals going where we can all access that information?
Yeah,
on our
but it
computer?
was email. It was emailed, 3 different emails.
No, but you
to all
can't
the
get into the general ledger, FMIS system. You can't get into the FMIS system.
Oh, I know. I would love to.
Is
Yeah,
that-
I mean, that's-
Is that the request? I did not know that was the request, Mr. Chair. Is that the request?
How else do you look at a budget? How else do you look at a budget but comparing it against what you've spent as opposed to a budget that you could be off? The budget that you were talking about, you were over by almost $5 million in, if my memory serves me correctly. You're still comparing it to a budget that you have the actual information. And what's the consequences of being $5 million over budget? None. So what are we doing here as a board? That's what you're hearing from me. I'm a business guy. Look, I've been working for 46 years. I'm 67 years old.
Mr. Chair, was the item you're referring to the budget to actual comparison?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was sent to the board on
No, but there was-
5/31. I have a record of it right here.
That's the top line information. You need the
Okay.
detailed information that gets
Okay.
into the various elements of what makes that up. And even that's what I use to look at how there've been an 8.5% increase every year over actual since 2021. So you had already been ramping up far in excess of what you're capable of doing. I mean, you're in a community that can't afford to pay those additional increases. So what are the consequences? To load more onto them? Or do we have to do belt tightening here within the organization? I vote for the second one. I mean, you just can't have everything that you want that's why, look, we had our conversation about the Main Street facility. It was going to be $40 million back in '21. It's $160 million. I mean, I talked to you at that time about the design-build concept. It's like letting a fox in the hen house with a contractor. And we've quadrupled that amount of money. And we've gone through phase one, or we're going through phase one, and it still doesn't give us additional capacity. You know, we spent that money and you've worked on the headworks. So I don't understand it. And then at the last meeting, your COO said something to the effect, well, we could get into a consent decree or an order from DEP, and that could happen if something's not reached by 2032. Well, we're in 2024. So I recognize the fact that I've lived this for almost 30 years. And I thought that my presenting this information, having it unrequited, if you will, would have some effect on the board to take us in a different direction, because this isn't the direction that I see GRU going.
To your point, sir, it does with me, and I do appreciate this. You're getting upset at us, you're getting upset at the employees, and you're barking at them. This isn't that type of board. I think we should be professionals up here. And like I
Wait
said-
a second, I'm not a professional.
Not the way you're acting right now, no.
You're the one that yelled at me several times in this situation. You're the one that raised your voice at me and told me. So, be careful throwing stones in a
I'm
glass
not the
house.
chair, I'm just a jerk director or.
Okay,
member or
you can
whatever.
minimize it and make fun of it.
No, but what I'm saying is, you know.
That's fine.
So, can I?
Yes, sure.
So just for process here, so maybe the board can understand a little more. We had our last meeting on Wednesday, right? It was a Wednesday. And say by Friday, what did you tell each one of your people by Friday? Just what was the direction for each one of them? Just lay that out for me. Like what's Tony telling them? Because everybody's throwing everything at you. Did you give, so maybe the four culprits are over there. Did you give them explicit directions of what needed to happen? Are you leading them or are you just hoping for the best? Like, so by Friday, wait 2 days, what had happened? What was on her desk, what was on his desk, so forth?
So there aren't culprits over there.
No, I don't think so. I think there's a culprit in the room. I'm just trying to figure out what's going
Well, no,
on here.
I'm not being silly. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
being very honest. Like, we have very qualified professionals that, as Ed said, been in the industry. Our executive team, we have 75 years of experience at GRU on the executive team, over 100+ years of experience in the utility industry. So we have very qualified people that are analyzing and looking at how to go forward.
agree.
So it was interesting what you said about Friday. So what we were planning for a meeting the next Wednesday. And so what we had to do is try to put the information together, do the analysis, put the information together, run a financial model to get answers and get all of that back to the board by that Wednesday. And so as we started to look at, okay, what do we do about the capital budget? What are those areas? So each of the officers are going back to their capital budget and reevaluating and trying to determine what is the risk of delaying this? What is the risk of not doing this project? How do we quantify that risk? How do we identify if there's things that we can move out? So that was happening immediately. The next question was, how do we go into the O&M budget and find those things? Well, we had 2 years of analysis where we did continue to reduce the budget. My perspective is not that we had fluff in the budget, that we had all this extra that now we need to shave off, that we had reduced those budgets over those 2 years. And so we're sitting there with a day to go, and what we determined was, look, why is this happening? Why are costs going up? What's driving that? Looking at those increased costs, those are things we can't just arbitrarily reduce. So for example, just to kind of go to what somebody referred to earlier, these are real increases in actual costs that are occurring. So our labor budget at the water plant is $1.4 million. Chemicals went up 2.6 million, almost twice as much.
Was that increase in anything that I talked about tonight?
No, that was not in there.
So that's the point I'm making here, folks. He's sitting there talking about costs that I'm not arguing. These are the costs that he's not addressing. He's putting up something that I'm saying, fine. Not addressing those.
I think I tried to address the ones that you suggested. I kind of went line by line through those.
Yes,
And so
and
I
you
was
had
just
no-
describing, you made some comments about budgets going up overall that didn't have to do with those. And so I was addressing that directly.
And that's the problem with the give and take that's going on right now. I started this out with, I see $12 million of reductions that can be made.
Mr.
I
Chair, I
don't
call
see
the
anything.
question.
Yes, sir.
I call the question.
Sure.
Let's vote.
Mr. Chair, before we vote, I think it'd be helpful if we state the motion again. Additionally, I don't know if we want to provide time for staff to speak. It's not our first rodeo, so we may want to consider that as well.
Sure.
Well, I've called the question, so, Mr. Attorney?
The state law does provide for the public to speak before you.
They already did.
They already spoke.
And if we've completed
And
that.
that's why I've called the question, because at some point, I think we're all passionate, and I think we're all gonna have to step back a little bit and ask for forgiveness and give some forgiveness in our statements. But I think we beat this dead horse. And like I said, Tony, I almost feel like firing you just for compassion, buddy, because I wouldn't want to go home to my wife every night. And just to that point, when they did this crap to you, I called them all up and I gave them my what for. You remember that? I mean, you do remember that because I made the phone call. I didn't think it was appropriate to publicly do this to somebody, and that's my
It's the
statement.
only venue we have.
No,
to
and I
do that.
respect that, Ed. I do respect that. It's unfortunate that it has to get this far
Well,
out.
and it's why I also pointed out when I was asked the question by the city commission, I came back with areas they could cut at their own peril or with my blessing in certain areas, and I got none of that. So there's a vast difference between what happened to me and what we're talking about with Mr. Cunningham. I mean, no, you brought up the subject,
No, I
and it
said
needs to
okay.
be discussed.
Fine.
You know, after I bought out the biomass plant, a month after buying out the biomass plant, on the night my wife started chemotherapy for pancreatic cancer, they tried to fire me,
No, they did.
okay? Then they tried to have a charter amendment in which they eliminated the general manager. And then on September 13th, 2021, in an in another meeting, 13th, that's correct, they tried to fire me again. And then they finally did on January 26th or 27th of 2022. So the question is,
Could you please repeat the motion before the
Um,
board
yeah,
votes,
what-
please?
Your motion was to immediately terminate the general manager of the utility. David made the motion, you made the second.
I second it.
And then my question would be, who's going to be the interim?
Well, you just asked for a vote.
Yeah.
That becomes a second
No, I
motion.
said, then my question would be.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that would have to be discussed after that.
Right.
So,
Mr. Chair, I think you would initiate the vote, I believe, correct?
well, isn't this a roll call vote?
No, sir.
I don't believe so.
It's not a referendum.
Oh, I don't know, okay. All in favor of removing the general manager, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay?
Nay.
Nays have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Move on with discussions about the budget.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we immediately reinstate the CEO search. I know previously we had Mr. Lawson as the, we asked Mr. Lawson if he would spearhead that. My methodology for that was because out of us board members, he was definitely worked with more executives than any of us have. So I would like to make that motion, but I want to make sure if it goes, I would probably think it'd be smarter to have you doing the search, or at least leading it, bringing it back to the board as Mr. Lawson would. Because I didn't feel at the time, as the chair, I was the best person. And like I said, I know you can't tell the love here, but you are a qualified person that would ask the right
Well,
question.
as a qualified person, I would tell you that I don't think it's the appropriate time to do an executive search during this transition. What you need is a qualified interim in there that will direct the utility. Mr. Lawson is correct, Director Lawson is correct. You're not going to hire a permanent replacement right now because there's too much turmoil. I mean, we have the work that's going on trying to deal with the referendum, deal with the issues concerning House Bill 1645. You need kind of a fixer in there right now. So I would not support that motion.
No, that's what I want to hear. I mean, it makes sense.
So how can we, if I may
So-
speak, Chair?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
How do we go about naming an interim? I don't have a list of potential candidates.
Well, we're not firing them.
We're not
Well,
firing.
no,
We
no, but
voted.
I'm just saying, if we go down that path and we need the interim, because Tony decides he's had enough and resigns, I would like to put forth a motion that we have some sort of a list or reach out to staff or somebody. I don't know what that comprises. I've never been in this kind of situation, especially with a general manager such as that has that expertise. So educate me, please.
Well, I think there's nothing to be done at this point. I mean, there's been a
It's a moot
vote.
point.
It's a moot point, yeah. I would agree.
And so, and again, I love the fact someone said that I think David said, we haven't had the opportunity to have a fireside chat.
Yes.
So I love, and you might not notice it, but I love the conversation, I really do. So
You guys do.
No
One of you does.
So, you know, if we're not going to go out for a CEO search, and we feel that there's things that need to be done, are we going to be able to work with the current CEO and get those things done? And that would be you, with your expertise, being able to help practice. And I think you have all of our attention. And if Mr. CEO doesn't feel that he can work with the direction that you want to go, then I would ask him to raise his hand and walk out the door. Because I was under the impression we'd go for a CEO search.
Yeah,
But I see your point. No, I mean, Mr. Lawson actually, I think, sort of backed that up, perhaps.
I think you get somebody crazy enough to come here and, move from Montana or someplace just because he wanted to come to Florida.
Where'd you come from? No.
Yeah, that's about right.
No.
I think there's no other alternative at this point.
So can I address a little bit? Look, I'm fully, utterly, completely committed to doing what is best and right for this utility and the customers we serve. I will continue to do that with professionalism, just like I have done and demonstrated throughout my career here at GRU and in this town for the last 3 decades. So I will continue to do that. My recommendation, really the source of it came down to, we have a very short period of time to get an approved budget to meet the law. The entire year, we've been focused on how do we transition and meet the new law that was put in place. And so the attempt was, let's get our budget passed and then do what we're doing here tonight. Let's look more in detail. If we need to change the way we're budgeting going forward, we'll have a little bit of space and time to do that. To try to do that in a week period or 10-day period has been extremely challenging. And so I think with those circumstances, moving forward, again, the recommendation was move forward with the budget we have, and then it meets all of the other criteria we established in terms of 0 rate increases in 25, meeting the goals of the debt and the 250 days cash on hand. It meets all of those criteria. What it seems like we're narrowing in on is, can we reduce expenses further? And what I'm saying is that we can evaluate that with the board as we move forward. There was not time before the July 1st deadline to do that more in depth. We were not able to present a budget of how it was even built. And so I would love the opportunity for us to do that, for our staff to do that. We are qualified to do that. We can provide that, and I believe we can continue to take the utility in a better direction like we have this past year. So that's where I'm coming from. But again, I work at the pleasure of the board.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, sir.
I think in the future, Mr. Cunningham, if you're going to go, I think 5 million, an additional 5 million is a drop in the bucket when we're looking at this big budget, such a large budget. And if I was in your shoes, I would have come back and said, okay, here are the potential cuts that we could make, such as you mentioned tree trimming. What is the risk involved with that?
Right.
So that we know, because we don't all have the utility experience that the chair has.
Yep.
That gives me, Member Haslam, Member Carter, Member Lawson, gives us a better understanding of that risk aversion that we have, but also balancing that budget, because I really think that there's a lot of fat there that could be trimmed. But knowing those risks that are involved.
This is where I'm going to support Mr. Cunningham, in that those operational areas are there for a reason. I did not argue with the inflationary numbers. I mean,
I was just using that as an example, Chair.
and that's fine. That's fine. And you can call me argumentative. You can call me a bunch of different things. But it was these items.
Yes.
These were the items. And we never really discussed those. And instead, we jumped toward this idea that, well, maybe we can cut tree trimming. We do this. No, that's the urban legend about GRU. They have great staff. They have great professionals. I have a problem with the way the budget was developed. They did not take into account ability to cut out certain expenses. Nobody has gotten that, except maybe Director Haslam here. That's what this was about. And this was never debunked, never argued. And now we're sitting there going, well, yeah, it's good stewards, so maybe we ought to look at this. Yes, go ahead.
I believe I did go through those items and
Not to my satisfaction.
Okay, would you like me to, again, I just saw this
No, I think we're
tonight,
done, I think we're done with that. I'm just making a point of order.
I believe I did address them, is all I'm saying.
So, I want to work with the board, and I think that, because I've said it publicly more than one time, that I want the GFT gone, right? You guys have said, well, you know, drug addict, whatever the government is, drug addict, that's about right. And you're wanting to, you know, like, hey, you're worried they're going to come after us other ways, right? So I'd like to be able to work with you guys and like, well, can we meet in the middle? I say let's cut it in half, right? But the problem is, if we cut it in half, I want that $7 million to come from somewhere else. I don't want it to come from the people. So I want it to come from somewhere else in this 12 million? Yeah, this 12.5 million. Let's find 7 million here that we can meet in the middle on the general transfer fund. I think that's reasonable. Even though I want it gone completely, I would say, you know what, hey, we can, you know, deal a little bit, right? Doesn't even have to be set. It could be 10 million. I don't know. I talked to you guys about that. But some of these other numbers have to come down is what I think would need to, in order for me to want to vote, like, so we can vote cohesively, something has to happen. You know what I mean? 'Cause otherwise it's, you know, a couple of us against each other, and it just, I know we're 5 and somebody's going to jump on the bandwagon of one or the other, but that's where it's at.
So that's why the first recommendation that I made were 5 subcomponents, and that was regarding the budget. Reduce CapEx by $20 million, and I had a way to do that if you turn to that page. Reduce budgeted O&M by 12. Doesn't have to be that, it can be what you decide. Reduce utility base rates to 0 for fiscal year 2025. Keep the GFT intact, keep the formula intact,
Right.
but recover the $68 million until it's depleted. And then, yes, go ahead.
Plan or something? I mean,
Well, yeah, that would be 15 million, 15 million,
15 or whatever.
so 4.5
4.5
years.
years.
right, oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Okay,
I say, so, okay, I got you. I didn't know what the out was, okay.
right. And then we reduce projected revenues from the 88 million coverage, and as Mr. Benton showed, to no more than 50, that would do that. It would go toward other sources. You know, you could go to rate reduction in the future or debt defeasance at that point. So, I mean, if any of the board would be willing to make that chair recommendation on the budget motion, I would entertain it.
Can I
Well,
comment?
can we wait to the board? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
You want,
Well, I just clarity, and again, and I can defend it, it's like anything else, I get passionate about stuff too. Yeah, well, that's why we get along so good. You know, my original thought and proposal was to recoup that 68 million over 10 years. My only thought, and I understand, and I do respect that we're supposed to look at utility, only utility, but we're also supposed to look at its customers. In this case, it's the city of Gainesville only customers, doesn't affect the county. So I do, whether it's in business or anything else, I want to protect my customer. You know, is that overreaching? Perhaps it is. I guess everybody can interpret it. I would support something that we recoup that over 10 years. So that'd be 6.8 million a year over the next 10 years. That's something I could support. Using, you know, we have the 15.3 million now. And my original proposal, when I went and talked to the commissioners when I was chair, was to keep 15.3 million flat and recoup the 68 million over 10. So a reduction of 6.8 million over 10 years. And that was just something, and I won't tell you that all the commissioners or the mayor or anybody said yes. I told them what I thought, and you can imagine they didn't buy me lunch, okay? The reducing CapEx by 20 million, I told you in the beginning of this meeting, I'm gonna look at you for guidance on this. You know, like, you know, when it comes to being able to tell me about scooters and that type of business, I'm gonna go to David, and I'm real estate, and, you know, so I am going to look to you for guidance on that. If it's achievable without killing the utility, I'm all over it. Because every penny we save can go to debt reduction or to rate relief. And you know, I remember when you and I had this talk about the biomass and how passionate we were to get out of that contract. In my office, we're screaming because it was destroying the people. So I do
You
want
were
to.
louder than me.
There's no doubt. So the one I had the heartache at, I stick at number 4. Other than that, I would make that motion the way I stated it. If, over the 10-year, 15.3 froze, 10-year reduction to 68 million, I could make this motion.
You make it?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion as stated. Reduce CapEx by 20 million, starting with $15 million reduction as GM suggested for the following, with the remaining 5 million allocated prorated basis among the departments. Okay, that's item number 1. Number 2, reduce budget O&M by $12 million, appointed a portion between FY 24 and 25 as chair analyzed support. Okay, reduce utility rates to 0 for FY 25, and that's across the board. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. On the GFT, have that at 15.3 million flat for the next 10 years, recovering our 68 million, which would be 6.8 million reduction out of the 15.3 for the next 10 years till we're zeroed out. Obviously, any boards in the future can do what they want. Reduced projected revenues from 88 million to 50 million over the next, at the end of the 10-year period. That is my motion. If anybody wants clarification, please ask. Need a second.
Anybody want, is there a second forthcoming on that? I'll pass the gavel. I'll second that.
Okay.
So now customer.
Mr. Cunningham had a question.
Can I have comments, or do you want me to wait till after?
I think you ought to wait till after. In the meantime, I'll talk to our clerk so that she could make sure that's typed just the right way. Probably because you can bring it up, right?
Everything's good.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I need to get it all finalized to bring it up for everyone.
Procedure is not my strong suit.
Happy to do
I know,
that.
I'm being serious.
No,
So even when I stepped over you and I swear to God, I don't know what I'm doing. So.
And I'll be very honest with you. We're allowed to talk because we're out live, right?
You should be, your comments should be heard.
Comments should be heard. Okay. So I'm not an expert on parliamentary procedure. That's what I was passing on to Carter. So if I'm speaking out of line, it's not intentional.
Well, as a fairly since 2014 season, from me and a lot of people, it looked very orchestrated, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I do, after you said it.
Yeah, because I'm like,
Yeah.
I couldn't put Seabiscuit on the 5th for that one. I mean, I predicted a lot of things, but that wasn't one of them.
Okay, now that we've done this, we have citizen comment. Any citizen comment?
Mr. Chair, Jim Connors, could I hear the motion again? I was outside.
In its entirety?
Well, like, she's typing it up and we'll.
Well,
put
I
it-
could, it's as written, Mr. Conish, except for number 4, which would be keeping the 15.3 flat for 10 years, recovering the 68 million over that same 10-year period, which would be a reduction to 6.8 million off of the 15.3, but keeping it flat for 10 years. Other than that, it's as stated.
Would you give them?
It should
Sir,
go to the city clerk.
I've taken your pie chart and I've put in some language from the charter about the SLA-related losses.
Is this related to the motion? This has
Yes.
to be related to the motion.
Yes, it is. There's 2 aspects to the transfer. There's the direct transfer, and there's the indirect transfer, which represents the SLA losses. These losses are significant, and these losses are supposed to go into your flow of funds. So when you have your pie chart where all your money's going, the SLA losses are basically sort of a black hole where it's not reflected in the financial statements. So let me just go over what I've been able to identify just as a layperson. We're losing $3 million in IT this year. This is in addition to the 15.3. They breached the MOU to pay for the county streetlights. That's 1.1 million more. I have information that GRU is not recovering the cost of city streetlights by hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're not charging any money to collect tens of millions of dollars in utility tax. You also have to administer that. Same with the local sales tax. The property appraiser charges when they collect your money. GRU's doing it for free. We're funding the city attorney to the tune of over $500,000 to try to either thwart the authority or have it wiped off the map. And it goes on and on and on. The low-income energy assistance program, the gas rebates. They have identified 42 different financial associations, and on the vast majority of them, there's nothing in writing. There's money just freely changing hands, and no one knows how much. I have a whole list of public records requests trying to get at this, and they've ignored it. I'm going to give it to your attorney, asking for an accounting of how much you lose, not just in IT, but on all the other things that you're providing to the city. So the direct transfer is only part of it, including the 68 million in losses. Because while we lose 3 million this year on IT.
Your time is up, Mr. Conish, I'm sorry.
It's okay. We lost more last year.
We understand your point. Thank you.
you.
Twice in one night, Mr. Varvel.
Yeah, and hi, Steve Arvell. I'm Director of the Office of Management Budget for your partners, former partners down the street. I come from an era where reasonable people can disagree. Not so sure that happens when you walk through that door anymore. And I wasn't going to speak, but I keep hearing about this $68 million based on a gap analysis above the line net operating revenue, which includes a non-cash depreciation. And I didn't want to get dragged into this. But it is a metric upon which to gauge how much above or beyond what GRU could afford to pay in a general fund. I would argue there are more than one measure of that. And I would look at your flow of funds analysis, which was the guide, essentially the guardrails put on the GSC in response to the Auditor General report. Come up with a formula and make sure that it's something that the utility can pay for out of its current operations. So I went back through 2018, right up through 23, and ran your flow of funds, and I get a number that's much different than 68 million. There were years where the current operations could not justify the transfer. Absolutely, I'm not here to dispute that. I'm saying it's not to the sum of 68 million, and I am going to be sending you that analysis so it can get picked over and I can get criticized, because I did not want to get drawn into this fight. But I want what is equitable and based on what you tell your investors. This is the resolution to ensure that we're living up to our obligation. Now, I heard a lot about this IT $3 million. I'm going to ask the four of you, not the chair, if someone came to you and said—
You're supposed to direct questions through the chair.
If any of you, Mr. Chair, had somebody come to you and say, here's a bill for service. Well, how did you get that? They tell you this is their allocation methodology. You go, that makes no sense. Would you please provide me with something that shows workload and allocation of resources towards specific projects? And you had to wait and wait and wait for that. Well, workload, which you have a very complicated and high-tech cost accounting system, so I thought they'd be relatively easy to get. They can't provide it. They give me wisdom tickets, which are requests for services. So yes, we dispute whether the 5.9 million is an adequate and appropriate charge for IT services. I don't think that's unreasonable. It has to be an arm's length negotiation for both sides to feel as though they are getting what they're paying for. Quite frankly, we're doing the same thing you all are doing. We're doing buy or build analysis on whether it makes sense to continue in some of these relationships. I understand that is the appropriate thing to do. Yes,
Sorry,
we're
Mr.
doing the same
Varvel.
thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the fact that you're doing it. Are there any other questions? Oh, you've got the motion up. You want to read the motion?
Yes, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Connie, I'm sorry. Go.
Well, so I I just want to be clear, again, this, doing this live. So this motion is going to mean we stop hiring, right? So we're freezing hiring. We can't hire any new employees. This is my understanding of this, by freezing that. Number two, that we're going to reduce the electric service budget. So, if the cost does exceed that, we will have to bring that back to the board, which I've heard is that's acceptable. The 0.5% of O&M budget, that's just, we're going to go across our O&M budget and reduce it by $1 million. Eliminate the IRP contract services. So the IRP contract services the RFSQ doesn't have a cost associated with it. So we could stop that process, but in terms of that elimination of that doesn't have a cost associated with the RFSQ process. Professional services, that's another just reduction, like the zero-based budgeting impacts. And so what I'd like to bring back is an evaluation of what these mean, reducing this, as well as the gas rebate. So the way the budget is now, my question is, are we doing these things on here? Is direction from the board to do all these things on here to get that 12 million? And is that in fiscal year 25?
No.
Is it beyond fiscal year 25?
It's 24 and 25. There's ones that are a portion for 24, and there's some other portion for 25. And frankly, if voted upon, that becomes your directive.
Right, so
At that
there's no
point.
reason to bring, hey, here's the risk or impact of that back.
Right,
Okay.
right. And then to your question, I think you were talking about the request for qualifications. I mean, as long as it doesn't have any cost associated with it, you could proceed with that, except for there's the follow-up recommendation that you bring immediate communication to the board on the IRP plans. So I would expect, and maybe the board will opine on that, or maybe they won't. But if that passed, I would think that falls within that bucket of your responsibilities to come back and before you would proceed with spending other monies, we need to know where they are and what they're for.
Yeah, so June 26th was the plan date. We discussed that, of bringing the IRP back to the board.
Right.
And so I think we would stay on that schedule associated with that. And then, so I guess part of my question is it prescriptive on these things that we do these things, or is it just reduce $12 million? So that's one question.
No, I think as the chair analysis supports is the prescriptive portion.
Okay, and then the other question that I have is, so then are we going to move forward from this motion to bring back June 26th, the budget resolution for approval?
I don't see any reason why not.
Okay.
I mean, it might not pass, and we're still talking about some other things. I don't know.
I'm looking at all the professionals. Am I missing? Are we missing anything? Do we need any other? Okay.
So with that, do you want to read the motion, Ms. Clark?
Yes, Mr.
Ms. Clark?
Chair.
I just can't get that right, sorry.
That's fine. Mr. Chair, the motion by Director Carter is, number one, reduce CapEx by 20 million, starting with 15 million of reductions as the GM suggests, followed with the remaining 5 million allocated on a pro rata basis among the departments. Number two, reduce budgeted O&M expenses by 12 million, a portion between FY24 for 2024 and 2025, as the chair's analysis supports. Number three, reduce utility base rates to 0 by FY 2025. Number four, keep the GFT formula intact, freeze at 15 million, and recover the 68 million overpayment against the 15 million by 6.8 million over 10 years. Number five, reduce projected reserves from an 88 million overage to no more than 50 million by the end of the 10-year projection period.
You did it so much better than I did it.
Yeah.
Trust me. Put a
I had-
dyslexic on reading here.
Maybe we can put Director Carter over there and you can sit here.
Oh,
That might be a
there you
little
go.
better.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair and Board. I have a lot of help, so.
So is this a roll call vote?
Can we comment?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, I was just trying to find out.
Yeah. So again, I go back to my original statement. We're voting on something that an analysis that you put together, but the staff really hasn't had a chance to really analyze or give true detailed feedback on the risks associated with this. And so I'm uncomfortable voting on something or voting for something that really just comes from one person, and not allocating time for the current experts who run GRU to give us their feedback. And so that's.
So noted.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, yes, sir.
I'm not disagreeing with you, quite frankly, but I'm sort of doing, I guess I'm forcing a hand. I'm going to go with this, and I think if there's a good enough counter argument and the staff brings back something and says, listen, these are unintended consequences, I think this board at that point will adapt. So, and I think that's been mentioned many times, just for the simple fact that, as I listen to Chair Belarski and I get flashbacks of biomass and everything else, I think if nothing else, for a minor point, in a long series of events that cost our ratepayers, maybe they go home tonight and say, damn it, they did it. And I'm sorry to say it like that, but I think it's going to cause us to look a little deeper, and I think you bring that expertise, and that's what I told you in the beginning, I'm going to have to lean on you. That's what I'm doing, so if you're wrong, it's your fault.
Okay, got it.
So,
Any comments from, any comments from the board?
Yeah, we got to do something.
Yeah. I concur.
Mr.
So-
Chair, to your question, it is not a roll call vote.
only resolutions be.
Oh, okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. With that, all in favor, say aye.
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 All in favor, against, aye. All against? Nay. I'm really, okay, motion passes.
Next item is technically not a comment.
Oh, wait. I didn't know, and I'll throw one last thing out there. That there was a follow-up set of recommendations, and that was that BFA would undertake an analysis of the appropriate percentage of GRU's net earnings before capital contributions and GRU transferred to the city, because part of the issue here with the net earnings is we don't want to pay over a certain percent back to the city. We want to retain money, going to your point, Mr. Cunningham, within the organization to do those things, that whether it's rate relief, investment, or debt defeasance, you can't have the money going out the door. So that was one, and the numbers I've seen have been anywhere between 50 and 70% of the budget. So that remainder would stay within the organization. The second thing would be GM should provide immediate communication to the board on IRP plans, decisions, incurred costs, and projected planning costs given the recent solicitation, which was the board was unaware. We also have the GM shall provide immediate communication on the on the Main Street water reclamation facility capacity renewal and upgrade project. And then we should also have communication to the board on the SLA MOU status. So these are the follow-up to some of the discussions we've had tonight.
So moved as Chair stated.
Do we have a-
Motion to move it as Chair stated.
Second.
do we have a second? And then, before we go to citizen comment, we have a.
Yeah, just real quick, just so, number 6, we've already started some of that, so I agree. I think that's a really good idea. I mean, the idea was after this budget, we were going to focus on what are we going to do long-term and how do we best do GFT long-term? And so we've already started some of that, and that is, I think that's a great recommendation I agree with. On the
Wait a second, we agree.
Yeah. On the IRP, we have provided quite a bit of information, so we provided the presentations that we have given to the board members. The idea was to come back on June 26th with a presentation so that we could have dialogue and discussion instead of just, hey, here's the information. Again, we're in the middle of that process from the standpoint of we've done analysis, we've executed on that, And now we're at the point of looking at those options from the board. In addition to that, we're doing the financial modeling right now. So, we had to do all the other modeling to determine, okay, here are these different options. And we couldn't start the detailed financial modeling until that was done. And so we're at that point where we've got that information now, and we're doing that in parallel. But we can bring to you on the 26th a good overview of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the intent of that was.
Perfect.
Along with, almost a Gantt chart of, what the expected expenditures would be to get to that goal.
Right.
Because we need to know that.
Yeah, to your point, so a couple things happened. So the original analysis and modeling does a net present value of all the costs associated with providing electric service over a 25-year period. So that was done. As that was finished, and just recently, then that information is being provided to do the financial modeling of what does that mean to people's bills and impacts and things of that nature. Yes.
Excuse me. Hopefully this is working. So point of clarification, so there's different stages of financial modeling, right? So the final stage of some of the things that you've seen tonight that Mark presented tonight is showing like the rate impact, et cetera. We are not doing that. We are still trying to reconcile the files that have come out of sustainability. So that's what we're working on. So just make sure you understand there's different layers as you move through this process. We haven't reached that final layer of actually putting it into the corporate model. I just don't want you to walk away thinking that we're ready to give you like a bill impact or a rate impact. Because I remember that's one of the things that Director Lawson asked for was, what is the customer impact at the end of the day? We are not near that place just yet.
Anytime tomorrow is probably.
Thanks. Just want to make sure there's some clarification there.
No,
So
and that makes
sustainability is still working with some staff inside of BFA to get the files reconciled. Thank you.
So that, hopefully that's what I was trying to communicate. And then the last thing, or then you brought up about the Main Street project. So we can come and give a detail. So I think what you're looking for there is just like a really detailed presentation about that project, why it's needed, what's driving it. That's kind of what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what, the whole idea of the projected incurred costs along the way, right? I mean, we need to decide on that. I mean, as a board, that's what we're here for.
Right, yeah, and to your point earlier, we are doing phase one. We have, a system that was aging out and failing at the beginning. We knew that phase one wasn't going to add capacity for the whole plant because there's other things needed. But we did need to perform that, and we got a grant for almost half the cost of that as well.
Right.
So that is moving forward, but we have not approved moving forward with the second phase of that project. But we can bring that information. And then, so what I guess I'm trying to get to a little bit here is that for June 26th? I'm trying to get staff geared up on what. So we'll do IRP on June 26th. We do the budget resolution on June 26th.
We can work on what that timing will be, and you can always blame me that I wasn't in contact so that we can get it back.
Okay, very good. That's what I just wanted to clarify.
Okay. Did we have citizen comment on?
No, Mr. Chair. We still
You
need
already
that.
did it. Member comment now.
And,
No, Mr. Chair.
No,
We
we have to vote on
did,
the
a new
motion.
motion's on
Oh,
the floor.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Chair. The new motion is on the floor, which means we do still need
Right.
public comment.
Citizen comment?
Mr. Chair, Jim Conish, let me read to you the charter. I want you to, the definition of service level agreement, or SLA, means a contract entered into by the authority that establishes a set of deliverables that one party has agreed to provide another. You don't even have written agreements governing all this money that flows through the interfund exchange at a staff level. You don't even have written guidelines. It's a free-for-all. Now, I can't find this in the backup, but under last year's budget, operation and maintenance non-labor corporate expenses, sir. These are chemicals. Joint services for this year, 3.6 million. This is where the money comes for need to launch all these legal expeditions. It's not under legal services. There's this category, joint services. And this is where the rubber meets the road, sir. So a SLA loss is no different than sending money to the city. You're just sending things in kind to the city. It's not reflected on your financial statements. And to that extent, the financial statements are fraudulent. And the CFO has concerns about that. She expressed publicly. And it's not just IT. There's dozens of these relationships, and GRU is losing money all over the place, hemorrhaging, just like the uncommitted Connect Free funds. It just keeps flowing, and they just throw it away, city, on things that they're not supposed to be doing. We need to get a handle, and you mentioned this in your motion, we really need to give Mr. Cunningham a deadline to identify and quantify the SLA losses and stop it, just like UF is doing with the money they get for the bus service. We need to drill down on this because I'm telling you, it's a huge number. And it doesn't affect the operation of the utility to deal with the fact that we're hemorrhaging money into city coffers all over the place. And this is why debt increased 117 million last year. Debt increased 46 million the year before. And the SLA losses are significant. And moreover, anyone working for GRU needs to be working under Tony. That's why the city attorney shouldn't get a dime.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Thank you. Just for the record, and you can come on up, sure. Just for the record, there are services associated with every one of those SLAs. Some of those numbers represent risk management, where insurance money is allocated, those types of things. But that's the point of this motion, is to get more communication on that SLA. Mr. Cunningham mentioned the whole idea of fleet. When I was on board, we questioned the value that fleet was giving us, with the, some of the expenses. So rest assured, we're going to be looking at that with Mr. Cunningham. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Chuck Ross again. I want to address the excesses of $68 million. I did an analysis, and Chair, what years did you use for your $68 million? Because I never saw any backup to explaining how you arrived at the number.
It came off the GAAP financial statements, and it was 2018 to 2021.
Okay. So from 2000, not 2017?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Am I correct? Okay.
Okay, well,
Because-
17
just
actually.
Just for the record, and you can have the time, but I think Mr. Benton corroborated that calculation.
Okay, that's fine, because for 2017, there was a small profit in any case. So from 2018 or 17 to 2021, I get a number of 36 million, not 68 million. And if you go to the next year, there actually was a $20 million profit, so that money wasn't taken. So that should offset the number you're talking about. That would reduce it to 16 million. And that's because you failed to allot for the capital contributions from third parties, which per the.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it's not in the number. Do you agree?
Because it's not something other than an obligation on our part that they give us a system that we have to maintain, and it wouldn't be looked at by any organization as something that would contribute to cash available to the city.
But in the audited financial statements, they consider it revenue. In fact, the notes to the financial statements, contributions in aid of construction, GRU recognizes capital contributions to the electric and gas systems as revenues, which are subsequently expensed in the same period. Depreciation on these assets is recorded on a straight line basis over the estimated lives of the assets. So therefore, there's an expense line, according to what I'm reading here, that corresponds with the income line, so you can't exclude it. So the number 68 million is overstated. Now, I'm not saying there weren't losses, and I'm not saying that maybe numbers shouldn't be paid back, but we need to use the right numbers. So please take a look at that.
Yeah.
And also, I would just, on the side, I wish you guys would replace Mr. Bilarski with Mr. Carter. He was a very good chairperson, and, That's all I have to say about that.
I'd like to comment. You got a better chance going to the moon today than me being chair again. And that's if you
Well,
leave in 10 minutes.
I mean, I would suggest Mr. Lawson, but I don't know if he wants it. But he's the most level-headed guy on the board, and I said that once before, if you recall. Thank you.
Thank you.
I made the motion.
Did you?
So clarification, we did complete an analysis for GRU on a GAAP basis going back to 2003, and we did provide it for one of the board member requests. But you do have that period of time, the 68 million for the years in question. Overall, GRU has remitted 95% of its earnings after dealing with everything else. So there is an analysis that already has that information in it. The capital contributions, that's an asset that goes on the books. It's recorded as revenue for GAAP, but it's not actually cash that the utility can spend. So it's not like you can take that asset and hand it over to general government to spend. That's why there's that difference in that calculation. We have been asked multiple times over the past several years to substantiate that 68 million, and we've done it multiple times. So I just want to make sure that we've done this work. The number exists for those years.
Can I make a comment?
You had a moment. I interrupted you. Do it quickly.
It's very quick. I mean, if we're going to talk about GAAP and changing around, I mean, they go by GAAP to do an audited financial statement. I'm a CPA. I have 40 years. I know you are. And I think Mr. Lawson has an accounting background. If you're a CPA as well, you are. And so I was an auditor. I was hired out of school by Touche Ross. I had a job waiting for me. And that's how I was initially trained, and then I went into other things, started my own firm, whatever. 40 years ago plus. GAAP is GAAP, so you can't now make an arbitrary decision to ignore GAAP that when the number that goes into income, because then let's just ignore depreciation expense. That's $100 million a year. That's a paper expense. That's not actual
No, it
cash
isn't.
flow.
And you should know. You should know as a
Imagine-
CPA,
I
that
know.
represents
You
the
guys should
loss.
have lunch.
Yeah, we'll have lunch. And
Have lunch.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I'm just saying, you
No.
can't just arbitrarily
No,
pick
that
and choose what
recognizes
numbers you use.
the economic loss and the value that
I-
needs to be made up.
I'm not
and you know
disagreeing
that.
with you, but I'm saying if you're going
Yeah.
to pick and choose,
Yeah, we're
Okay, so
ignoring
let's
everybody
ignore-
in the room right now.
let's ignore it, right? Okay.
An asset is only an expense waiting to happen.
I
Okay,
don't disagree
remember
with that
that.
either,
Okay.
but you can't pick and choose GAAP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure you can.
Mr. Chair, if
yeah.
no further discussion by the board is needed, then I can go ahead and read the motion.
Yes.
Is that what you would like?
Yes, please.
Okay. BFA, Budget, Finance, and Accounting shall undertake an analysis of the appropriate percentage of GRU's net earnings before capital contributions and GFT to be transferred to the city with an emphasis on sustaining debt reduction, capital investment, and affordable utility rates. When complete, present that analysis to the board for consideration as part of the GFT GSE formula as a limitation on the transfer. Pause off the record. Can we please pull that slide up? Just so that the board may see the language. Thank you. Back into the record. Number 2, GM shall provide immediate communication to the board on IRP plans, decisions, incurred cost, and projected planning costs given the recent solicitation with which the board was unaware. Those costs shall be reviewed by BFA prior to board submission. Point number 3, GM shall provide immediate communication to the board on Main Street WRF capacity renewal and upgrade project plans, decisions, incurred cost, and projected planning costs given the magnitude and scope of the project. Those costs shall be reviewed by BFA prior to board submission. Point number 4, GM shall provide immediate communication to the board on SLA MOU status and expected costs for fiscal year 2025 budget process. Those costs shall be reviewed by BFA prior to board submission. And now you may go ahead and lead the vote, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All against? Motion passes.
Unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any other
I'm sorry,
comments?
Mr. Chair, can I ask just a quick, so immediate communication, so we provided IRP information, we're planning to come on the 26th. Is there other expectations from this motion to the immediate communication?
I don't want to speak for the board, but I don't have any.
I would say you wrote it, and I think in your preparation for meeting, as a chair should coach you in that direction.
Okay.
As like when you and I used to meet, same thing. That's, you know.
Okay, we'll discuss it.
We'll discuss it. It's a good question, though. I mean, we're not meeting tomorrow to figure it out.
Member comment.
Thank you,
Yep.
Mr. Chair. Is there any other comment, Mr. Chair, that the board would like to discuss during this time prior to adjournment?
Oh, well, we have member comments.
Yes, that's right, okay, because that
Anybody
that
would
was
like
part of
to
member
speak for the
comments.
good of the order? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, you first. I've been getting first.
I would like to see, I'm sure we can do a retreat, much like the city commission does, so that we can get a better feel for each other. I'm sure we would be in agreement with that, if that's something that we can do.
You know better than I do about
I
what.
think it'd be good. Just want to point out, he wrote it down here, and I'm just doing for the record, and he pointed to it, so that's what he wrote down for my eyes. Aren't you happy, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, and I was gonna bring it up in member
Well,
comment anyway.
well, that's where we're at, but anyhow. I think we could, we can look to see how that would go. Find a
Yeah.
place and have it. It's got to be noticed and all that. But I don't know if we need a motion right now. I think staff could start going on that direction, or,
Again, I mean, I think I can meet with the chair and we
Yeah.
can look at what
Yeah.
that would look like a little bit more and then propose that back to the board.
Yeah,
That's fine with me.
perfect.
Oh, go ahead, please.
okay. So, conversation, Chair Belarski called me and notified me he got a cell phone from GRU and he wanted to give me the phone number. Should I need to communicate with him, he wanted to do it via that phone, which there's no problem with that. It's a, public phone. During that conversation, I said, hey, I noticed that you took the invocation off the agenda, you jerk, something like that, but probably a little bit tougher.
It was tougher than that.
And I explained to him why I liked it on there. And then all of a sudden I said, hey, let's stop because you never know. We might vote on that 10 years from now or a year from now. So I wanted to say that publicly, that I had a one-way communication with him about that, just because I was sort of passionate about the invocation, and this is the very reason why, like that. And then, Mr. Belarski, if I yelled at you, I do want, Chair Belarski, I want to apologize. I'm as passionate as you are about these employees at GRU, every one of them. When I sat on the city commission in 2014 through 17, I really found a group of individuals that loved their job, loved their utility, and I know you do also. And I know in my heart, that's what you're doing here tonight, too. Okay? So if you and I bark at each other, let's ask for forgiveness. Let's make sure we can look at each other in public. And I do apologize, but I barked at you. I'm just very passionate, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. There was no ill feelings that I had toward you or anyone. I am strictly an objective manager, leader of various organizations. And when I see things that don't pass the sniff test for me, I, like to see them corrected. And that's what the intent was this evening. I think we have a fairly good result, which is, what I always would tell people, we're going to have arguments, we're going to be going back and forth, it could get heated. We ended up with a budget that is $20 million reduced in CapEx, another $12 million over 24 and 25 in O&M, non-fuel O&M. We have some recorded deliverables between the board and the general manager. All in all, I think, and we've recovered the $68 million over the next decade. So, I think, quite frankly, that's a major accomplishment. So, I'm going with that. Anybody else?
I agree.
With that, I think we're